to answer in the chat a one-word answer. What does the word amendment mean? One word. Amendment. Just joining us, good morning. You're telling me in a chat, one word answer. In one word, what does the word amendment mean? If you're amending something, what are you doing? Good morning. Okay, we in? So the reason I asked, remember, just to recap, we introduced you guys, we got started on Unit 6. And part of Unit 6, well, all of Unit 6 is about land use controls, how we can use our land as regulated. And specifically, we were in public land use controls. And the best example of a public land use control is zoning. So you guys remember we went through some zoning terms, just some basic definition of zoning terminologies. And one of the zoning terms that we discovered last week was a zoning amendment. If you're amending something, you're changing it. So an amendment is a change. In that case, in a zoning amendment, the zoning has been set for, say, for example, multifamily residential. I'm just making something up. And somebody is proposing to change the zoning. So a zoning amendment is on the table. Again, you guys, we're going to see that word again when we get into contract law, because when we get into contract law, buyers and sellers can agree to go under contract. Buyers and sellers can agree to change the terms of their contract once they're there. So we're going to talk about amendments again. So where we left each other on Tuesday, am I recording? Did I? Okay. Where we left each other on Tuesday, we were just finishing up on zoning, and this is the last thing we saw, so you guys should already have this. Remember what we said, Unit 6 is the first true unit that brings the real estate agent into it. You guys have spent the first 5 units wondering why the heck we're here, right? So now Unit 6, we actually start bringing future you guys into it and our roles and responsibilities. And one thing we said when we finished up talking about zoning was each agent's responsibilities. If you're the seller's agent, you're working with the seller. Zoning is what's known as a material fact. Now we're going to do a deep dive in material facts next week. We're going to learn all about material facts. Right now, what we need to understand about a material fact is it's something that I have to disclose. And zoning is one of those things that the listing agent, the seller's agent, has to disclose. They have to advertise in their listing the zoning. When you put a listing into the multiple listing services, there's fields, and you plug in the information, and some of those fields are required, which means you can't submit it if you don't have the information. Zoning is one of those fields. So listing agents, seller's agents, you always have to check zoning. Where do you check it? Your county's GIS. Please don't worry about that stuff now. Where you get stuff, what you're supposed to do before you list, how you do it, all that good stuff. That is once you get your license and you affiliate with your firm. Your new firm will help you. They'll probably provide you with checklists on things to check, things to look at, things to verify. And zoning, anything in the GIS is going to be part of that. So please don't put your cart in front of your horse. I promise you will get there. Right now, good morning. Right now, we're just understanding that zoning is something that the listing agent, the seller's agent has to check, and it's something that they need to disclose. Buyer's agents. Buyer's agents, for the most part, we should be able to rely on the information that's in the system. So when you're going to go show your buyer 123 Main Street and you see that the zoning is residential, mixed use, mixed family, multifamily, excuse me, residential, multifamily, you know, for the most part, we should be able to rely on that. But what we need to understand as buyer's agents, if we have any reason to question the information that's in the system, if we look at it and say, are we sure that's right? Or if your buyer says, are you sure that's right? Or if your buyer discusses a specific need with you, if they say, for example, I plan to convert my garage into a hair salon, isn't that a pretty specific need? Isn't that pretty specific? I think so. And when our buyer shares that with us, we now have a duty to help them verify, to help them make sure that when they buy, the zoning and the covenants, if they're in an HOA, which we're getting to, we'll talk about that in just a minute. We have a duty to help the buyer verify that information if it's relevant. You know, when I'm working with buyers and sellers, probably more so with buyers, but sellers as well, I tend to operate by a pretty simple philosophy. I'm a simple girl. I just, anybody else like to keep things simple? Why we got to make things so complicated, right? I operate by a pretty simple philosophy. If it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. If it's important to my seller, then it's important to me. And that's our duty to our buyers and sellers. And that is what we're going to start talking about today. I'll briefly introduce you to Unit 7. Next week, we get into agency, and we're going to specifically get into those duties and responsibilities. So again, with the zoning terms, just make sure you have a general idea of what each one means. I think I mentioned if you see a test question on those zoning terms, it's going to give you a scenario. Then it's going to say which, you know, zoning term applies. So just having that basic general understanding. Let's look at an example real quick. An owner listed a vacant building previously used as a computer repair shop with a broker. A prospective buyer asked the broker if a manufacturing company could operate in the building. Is that a pretty specific need right there? The buyer asked specifically, can I buy this property and use it for a manufacturing company? That's pretty specific, isn't it? This always makes my eye twitch a little bit. Without investigating, does anybody see where we just went wrong? Without investigating, good morning, the broker said, sure. Buyer makes an offer, seller accepts, and boom, we're under contract. Luckily, prior to closing, the buyer discovered that the zoning was commercial use that's not excluded from manufacturing use. Guys, when we're asked, you know, buyers hire us to help them through the transaction. Sellers hire us to help them through the transaction. If we're asked specific questions, we just can't answer for the sake of answering. And by the way, I don't know, let me get back to you, is a perfectly acceptable response. So please don't just make stuff up. If your buyer asks a specific question, help them investigate, help them learn. That's why they have us. What questions do we have so far in Unit 6, just on zoning? Still talking about public land use controls. The creation of subdivisions is a public land use control. Now, I'm not talking specifically about HOAs or covenants. Not all subdivisions are in an HOA. Not all subdivisions have covenants. We're just talking about the creation of a subdivision. And that is a public land use control, because remember last week or last class, I guess, we talked about the master plan. And we said the master plan was the city or county's projection. Where do you see yourself in 10 years, 20 years? And the creation of a subdivision has to comply with the city's master plan. Does this make sense? So developers just can't buy land and start developing. They have to get permission from the city first. So they go to the city, they go to the zoning board, they go to the city, they get proper permits, the proper things, and then they can start. You know, there's a whole lot of work that goes into creating a subdivision before you and I ever see the equipment that shows up to start clearing the land and start building. There's a whole lot of work that goes into it, and getting permission is part of it. So first off, let's see. Question comes in, overlay means you have to buy both. That's right. So an overlay district, you have, for example, residential and historic zoning. So overlay, yep, you got to follow both zonings. Does that non-conforming use override that? So if you had a legal non-conforming use, then that means you were using it before the rule changed. The historic district has probably always been the historic district, right? For as long as it's been coined historic. But that might be like a specific scenario, specific thing to look at. But the legal non-conforming use can continue despite the current zoning. That's what makes it legal. Good question. Thank you. So the first thing in talking about subdivisions, we just need to define what the heck a subdivision is. It's in quotes because I copied it straight from the book. Why recreate the wheel, right? No shame here. So the definition, just the definition of a subdivision, is a division of a tract of land into 2 or more lots. Maybe it's 2 lots, maybe it's 120, right? We're going to buy a chunk of land. The developer is going to buy a chunk of land and they're going to subdivide it into 2 or more lots for the purpose or sale of development. It includes the division of the land, and it includes the dedication or the change in existing streets. Whenever we create subdivisions, we got to give people the access to come and go, right? If we already have roads, they can use those existing roads, but it might be part of the creation of the subdivision is creating new streets. We're going to talk about those in just a second as well. There are just a few exceptions to the definition, to the basic definition. I wouldn't get too bogged down on this. Just be aware that there's some exceptions. And what I mean by this is not everything qualifies as the subdivision. So when we define that subdivision, there are a few things that wouldn't fall under that general definition. Anything that has 10 or more acres with no street, or anything that has 2 acres and no more than 3 lots. Again, don't get bogged down in this. So with the creation of subdivisions, as we said, the land, the development, the new subdivision has to be in line with the city's overall master plan. The city has to approve the subdivision before the developer can start. That's one of the very first things that happens, is the developer goes downtown and asks permission. And whether or not they're granted that permission is going to be whether or not it's within the city or county's master plan. One of the early things that the developer is going to do in a subdivision is create a plat map. Remember, we talked about a plat map back in Unit 4, one way to identify the legal description. Subdivisions are where we find plat maps. If you're just building a house on a road, that's not a subdivision. If you're creating a subdivision, then you will have, or the developer will have a plat map. They usually start with a preliminary plat map, which means they're still working it up, still making the final changes. The developer and the city are identifying where the easements are going to be, right? We've already agreed with easements. We got to have water and power and electricity and that good stuff. So where all is that going to be? So the developer works with the preliminary. It's the process until they can get it finalized. The developer can put a buyer under contract for a lot or for a new home in that subdivision with preliminary plat map. We can go under contract with a preliminary. However, before the first buyer in that subdivision closes, we have to have the finalized and recorded down for the public records. So we can go under contract with preliminary, but before the very first buyer buys in that subdivision, before the very first closing, we have to have it finalized and recorded. This takes me back to, I think we've said it a few times. You guys will probably hear me say it a few more times. A buyer deserves to know what they're buying. Can everybody agree with me on that? A buyer deserves to know what they're buying. Would you want to buy a house in a subdivision where you still had preliminary plans where things weren't finalized? Heck no. So we can put them under contract. If things change, the developer needs to notify the pending buyer of those changes, and they need to give them the out if the changes are that major, if they're that substantial. Give them the out of the contract. You can't force a buyer to buy if they don't know what they're buying. Make sense? So we work with the preliminary. Once it's finalized means the developer has finished it, the city has approved it and put their final stamp on it, and it's recorded in public records for everybody to access. Sometimes with subdivisions, especially the really, really big ones, you may have phases. So they may have phase 1 plat map, phase 2, phase 3, for example. We can, again, start closing on phase 1 when we get that plat map finalized. We may not be ready to finalize phase 2 yet, for example, but we're not closing in phase 2. We're still closing in phase 1. The developer could be fined, they could be sued. If they are discovered, it is found that they are selling properties without, closing on properties without that final plat map. The city could go after them, the buyer could go after them, the buyer could feel injured. They could go after them. Again, you guys, there's a whole lot of work that goes into a subdivision before you and I ever see this big equipment to show up. I know on our end, we're driving down the road one day and we see a chunk of land, and then the next day we're driving down the road and we say, oh my gosh, they're starting to clear it to do something. We go, wow, that was fast. Understand that developer might have been working on that for months, maybe in some cases even a year or so. So please don't think that they just show up one day with their equipment and say, all right, we're going to start clearing the land. There's a whole lot that goes on. Over on page 117, it kind of gives you the subdivision approval process. Just again, to be somewhat familiar, very, very basic, as you can see. The initial planning stage, the developer has to find land. They have to make sure it's suitable. Can we hook this land up to public water, public sewer? We need to draw up the preliminary plans, the preliminary plat map. We need to get initial approval from the zoning board. Stage 2, we can finalize things, start finalizing those maps, those preliminaries. And then 3 is when you and I start seeing them show up to actually start the work, actually start the build. So as we mentioned earlier, with subdivisions, comes streets. And if streets are already there, then obviously we can just piggyback off of those. But if this is brand new subdivision, never before just been a chunk of land up until now, we got to create streets. And so with creating subdivisions comes the creation of streets. All streets have to be dedicated to the North Carolina Department of Transportation. That's part of the developer's building phase process, if you will. They have to submit the street request to the North Carolina Department of Transportation. You guys good if I call them DOT going forward? DOT is the Department of Transportation. The developer dedicates the streets to DOT as private or public. Now, when we talk about private streets or public streets, I'm not talking about whether or not you can drive down them or not. When we talk about public or private, we're talking about who maintains them. If they are dedicated for public, DOT may maintain them. I'll talk more about that in a second. If they're dedicated for private, the homeowners that live on that street are responsible for maintaining them. Maybe they set up an HOA, that's part of their dues to maintain the streets. Maybe every time we get a pothole, they do a special assessment and they charge the owners. But if they're private, the responsibility of maintaining them is on the homeowners. Generally, not always, I know, but generally, those private streets will be in an HOA, and the HOA will regulate how that's going to be handled. So the developer comes in, they want to create the street, they want to dedicate it as public. DOT regulates how the developer builds the streets. There are certain standards that the developer has to meet in order for DOT to agree to take on responsibility. DOT is not going to let developers build streets however they want to, and then be expected to come in behind them and take care of it. Does this make sense? DOT is going to say, if you want me to maintain it, then you're going to build the street this way. And trust me, when I say DOT comes and checks on their streets periodically throughout the process to make sure that they are within their rules, regulations, within their requirements for construction. Usually, when we can, the developer will come in and put down the first layer of concrete. And then that's when they bring their big, heavy equipment in and start building houses. Have you guys ever driven through a subdivision that was being built? And you may notice there's space on the curb, for example, or maybe the manhole covers are still raised. We're waiting to put down the final layer of concrete until all that big, heavy equipment is out of there. So while we're building houses on that street, we're just using that first layer. Once that last house is built and all the equipment is out, then the developer will come through, put down the final layer, fill those gaps, and put down the final layer. And when the street is done, that's when DOT will decide if they're going to accept responsibility. So just because we dedicate streets, just because the developer dedicates streets to DOT is no guarantee that they're gonna accept them. DOT isn't gonna accept them until the project is done, until the big heavy equipment is out of there. If they're not built to DOT standards, they're not gonna accept them. And that subdivision will have private streets, which means the homeowners will be responsible for that maintenance. This has been a thing that's really gained in severity the last several years. We didn't always used to be as strict with our rules, I guess. We were a little bit lax. And back in the 90s and early 2000s, subdivisions were built. Developers were telling homeowners, oh yeah, it's public. DOT will pick it up. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. Do we see where this is going? Come to find out it wasn't fine. DOT said, no, we're not going to maintain it. Developers weren't notifying the homeowners. Fast forward 20, 30 years, we got potholes, we need repairs. Homeowners are calling DOT, go and come fix this road. And DOT is saying, we never accepted it. It was dedicated to us, but we never accepted it. We need to be careful as buyer's agents when we're working with buyers, particularly in new subdivisions that are still being built. This is where I think it's important that we have this conversation with buyers. They're dedicated for public. The hope, fingers crossed, everything we know about it should be accepted when it's complete. But guys, we have no guarantee. And that's what I think we need to prepare them for. There's some mad homeowners out there right now, understandably, very understandably. So just make sure, buyer's agents, I know a lot of times when you're working with buyers that are interested in a new homes community. Sometimes the new homes community will say, oh, just send your buyers, we'll take care of them. Hopefully by the time I'm done with you guys and we get through agency and the importance of it, you guys will say something like, no, I'm going to come too, because I need to know what my buyers are hearing, because I need to make sure that I'm best protecting them. Don't let somebody else take care of your client. Fair enough? It's your client. So make sure we're having these conversations. By the way, the street disclosure law, if you guys look on page 118, 119, top of 120, you guys see all that italicized on those pages? That's like straight up law. That's copy and paste from the law. So if anything you wanted to know about subdivision streets on these pages, and I don't think you guys need to spend all your study time on those pages, but I think if you glance through it, if you skim it, it'll put you a step forward and help you be prepared for dealing with subdivision streets. In case I forget, because I'm good to forget, if you guys look, when you look in the online learning system, in the Unit 6 material, there's a Q&A brochure from the Real Estate Commission addressing the creation of new subdivisions and public versus private streets. Again, it's on the online learning system in the Unit 6 material. I do really like the Q&A brochures that we have for you guys that scatter throughout the online learning system. Because I think they're good tools to help you guys better wrap your brains around the material. So if it's in the online learning system, it's there to aid you. It's there to help you. There's some rules, or one specific about the creation of subdivisions. This, the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. This is how we disclose information about the subdivision when we market or advertise across state lines. Now, let's talk about what this means. Does anybody else on this call, I know I'm not the only one, does anybody else in this call remember life before the internet? Anybody? Yeah, good. Thank you guys. Okay, some of you don't, and that's fine. That's fine. But for the rest of us, we remember life before the internet. And before the internet is when the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act really applied. Now it still applies today, because today, due to the internet, isn't all marketing across state lines? We put it online and it goes in the entire world, right? So we're going across state lines. So absolutely it applies today. But the reason, the creation of the law, it came to be before the internet, before people had all this information at their fingertips. And what was happening, you had those shady salesmen. They ruin it for everybody, don't they? And you had those shady salesmen going up to like Michigan in the dead of winter, door to door, knocking door to door. And what they were trying to do was sell land in Florida. It's cold, everybody's freezing. Let's sell land in nice, sunny, warm Florida. Doesn't that sound nice? And people were buying land in Florida based on these shady salesmen. Again, without having Google at their fingertips. Yeah, that sounds nice. Where do I sign? And then the spring thaw came. And they packed the family car up. Come on, let's go to Florida and check out our new land. Drive the whole way down there just to find out it's swampland that you couldn't build on even if you wanted to. And because of acts like that, because of situations like that, the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act came to be. We need to make sure that we're properly marketing all the information about a subdivision. Questions on subdivisions? Another public land use control are our building codes. Now, building codes are statewide. Zoning is like local in nature. Each city, municipality, county, zoning is local, but building codes are statewide. And the whole point of building codes is to provide minimum construction standards. Please note that word, minimum. Building codes set the floor. When you're building a house, this is as low as you can go. This is the standards. Can you go above and beyond the minimum standards? Can the builder go above and beyond? Of course, absolutely. But they set the minimum. And the whole point of building codes is for safety. We want to make sure we build homes that don't fall down on people. Zoning and building codes work together. So zoning is enforced, they require building codes. Building codes come into place to give us the standards. Zoning is permission. So zoning is enforced because they require building codes, how it's built, the different standards, the levels of construction. Permits, building permits are permission. If you want to build, if you want to do major renovations, if you want to do demolition and rebuild, or if you want to do major renovations, you need to go downtown to the zoning board and request a permit. They're going to make sure it complies with zoning. They're going to make sure that you are building or doing your major renovations or building in accordance to building codes. So permits are permission to build. The certificate of occupancy, also known as the CO, certificate of occupancy, closes out a permit. When you see a CO, you know that it was built according to these building codes. Somebody from the city came in, inspected it, checked on it, and said, yes, you've satisfied the building codes, you've met the minimum standards, we're going to give you a CO. Now, I've always heard when it comes to renovations or requesting permits, am I back? Are you guys here? I'm just a chit-chatting away. Did you guys hear about COs? I don't know how long it's been since I've been talking to myself. Okay, so CO closes a permit. Permit is permission. Permit is permission. Thank you. Permit is permission to build. A CO is saying you've built it, you've completed it, you've built it according to the codes. So again, the question comes in, when do I need a permit? I've always heard if you're messing with structural, electrical, or plumbing, a permit is required. Aren't those three pretty big components of a home? The structure, the electrical, and the plumbing. This is the point of the class that you guys like to say, do I need a permit to do this? Do I need a permit to do that? So whether or not you need a permit, everything you need to know about permits can be found in the North Carolina General Statute 160D-1110C. Google it, look it up. I'm not here to answer those questions. I'm going to be the source of the source and give you guys the information you need to go find your answers. I'm a good real estate agent, aren't I? There you go. There's your information. Yes, ma'am. Sydney?
Is there a copy of the certificate of occupancy in the zoning board, or is there any place to see that we have it?
In the public records?
Yes.
Unfortunately, the answer to that is it depends, because all counties are a little bit different, right? So all counties are different. So the best thing you can do, Sydney, is go to that county, find that property, check it out, call the zoning board. But
it's Guilford, but yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Unfortunately, that's the answer. It depends.
Thank you.
Sure. So again, you guys, if I'm doing major renovations, let's say I am building a room on the back of my house. I'm going to add a room. Aren't I messing with the structure of the home? Aren't I messing with electrical? Aren't I messing with plumbing maybe? Do I need a permit to build a room in the back of my house? I'd be willing to bet that NCGS 160D says yes. I'd be willing to bet if you called your local zoning board and said, I'm building a room in the back of my house, do I need a permit? I'm going to be willing to bet that they're going to say yes. Same thing if you want to finish your unfinished basement. Maybe right now your unfinished basement is dirt or concrete. It's not finished space. Things like that will probably require a permit. Now, this is what we run into as real estate agents. Not everybody knows or cares that they need a permit to do these major renovations. So you may come across property to list. You may be asked to list a property and you may come across unpermitted space. It's space that's been finished, but it wasn't permitted. Thus, we don't have a CO. We didn't have anybody come in and inspect it. Nobody came in and checked it out throughout the process. And that's a big part of what these permits do is they make it happen throughout the process. Let's say, for example, that I added on this room. I didn't, but let's just say I did. And I came in, I watched a couple YouTube videos and I ran out and bought me a hammer and I said, I can do it. And I built me a room. It's that easy. Anybody with YouTube and a hammer can do it. So I came in, I did everything all by myself. And let's say I don't know what I'm doing after all. And let's say there's faulty electrical behind this wall. There's no way to know that that's faulty now that the wall's up, right? The only way you can know if it's faulty is if you knock the wall down or wait for the house to burn down. Then we track it back to faulty electrical. Had I requested a permit, every stage of construction, they're going to show up and inspect it and make sure that it's built according to those minimum standards. So had I requested permits, I put the electrical in, they're going to come in and inspect it before I put the wall up. Does this make sense? We can request space to be permitted after the fact, but obviously it won't be as conclusive as we do it throughout the process. So this is where, remember when we started this unit, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about it. But as real estate agents, we always need to be alert to and in tune to our little red flags. And if you have a little red flag that goes up, maybe you look at that room at the back of the house and you say, it just doesn't look like it was the original. Or maybe you see that or that finished basement and you say, it looks newer than the rest of the house. As agents, we've got to ask questions. When we're with the sellers, before we list the property, we need to ask, is there any unpermitted space? Did you do any work that you didn't pull the permits? And if we see things that look newer than the rest of the house, our little red flag should go up, and particularly be prepared to ask some questions. The fact that this space is unpermitted is going to be a material fact. Again, we're just easing you into this idea of material facts. We're going to do the deep dive on material facts next week. The fact that it is unpermitted is a material fact, which means I have to disclose it. I have to disclose that this is unpermitted space. Unpermitted space, I can advertise the square footage. I can include it in my total square footage as long as it meets the other criteria that we'll talk about in Unit 8, but I have to disclose, the basement is unpermitted, or the 450 square feet room in the back of the house is unpermitted. We've got to disclose that. So I got a couple questions coming in. Would I need a permit to build a deck? Check it out, NCGS 160D, and check your local zoning board. That's my other thing, guys. I don't know all of our zoning boards. So you need permission to build a deck. I saw people are transferring their backyard, putting like jacuzzi, changing the yard and the floor, etc. They need a permit or zoning for that. NCGS 160D-1110C, or call your local zoning board. I can't answer those questions, but I can point you in the right direction. It amazes me how many homeowners don't know that they need a permit. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. We come across unpermitted space on the regular. I'll share with you guys, I had a listing appointment a couple years ago. It was an acquaintance, and I knew her when she bought the house. Heck, I was at her housewarming party. Fast forward, and she wants to sell it, and she calls me. Well, I'm doing my research, checking out the public records. I remember when I saw the house many years ago when she bought it, that it was a 3-bed, 1-bath. Tax records called a 3-bed, 1-bath. I go to the listing appointment, and there's 3 beds and 2 baths. I said, well, where did that second bathroom come from? And she said, well, we took part of this closet and part of this room and part of this, and we made our own, and we did it. And I said, what? And it looked nice. Fresh coat of paint can make anything look nice, right? And I said, knowing the answer to this, I said, did you guys get permits? Because had they had permits, the tax department would have a 3-bed, 2-bath, wouldn't they? The tax department didn't know that it was a 2-bath. So I asked, knowing the answer, but I asked, did you pull permit? No, we did it on our own. I said, that's great. I can advertise, I can list this home as a 3-bed, 2-bath, but I have to disclose that that second bathroom was completed without permits. That's what we have to disclose. I can advertise that it was a 2-bedroom, no problem. But I've got to disclose. I got to let consumer know. Why? Some insurance companies, if something were to happen, the house burns down and the fire marshal determines it's faulty electrical from that second bathroom, some insurance companies, some coverages may not cover that. Doesn't the tax department want to know that it's a 3-bed, 2-bath? They can make a little bit more money, can't they? So I'm getting questions like, is this going to affect the sale? I don't think it's going to affect the value. I don't think it's going to affect the value of the home, but I think that it's still something that we need. I know it's something that we still need to disclose, because a buyer deserves to know what they're buying. And bottom line, if the space is not permitted, they might run into some issues later in life. In the event the unpermitted space doesn't comply, does that become responsibility of the new owner as far as fixing the listing home to comply? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Let's understand, and this is kind of a hard pill to swallow. Once you buy a house and that deed transfers hands, that house and all its problems are now yours. Congratulations. So the new owner. So anyway, I told my acquaintance, I said, you can contact the county. They can come in and have this unpermitted, or excuse me, have this permitted after the fact. She didn't want to spend that money. I know she talked to a couple other agents, because she told me that she was talking to a couple other agents. Guys, in the end, none of us got the job. In the end, she went for sale by owner. Now, I don't know why she didn't share that with me, but my gut tells me she didn't want to deal with this permitted space. And every single agent walked in her home and said, did you not get a permit when you did the second bathroom? Because we all looked at the tax records and saw 3-bed, 1-bath. And what do you think a good buyer's agent is going to look at? A good buyer's agent. The tax records that see 3-bed, 1-bath. I don't know. I'm just speculating at this point, but it's probably a safe assumption. Wouldn't you guys think? None of us got the job. And she went for sale by owner. When getting permitted after the fact, does the tax retroactive for the additional space? Knowing the tax department the way I do, my gut says I want to answer that. You betcha. But I don't know. I don't know for sure the answer to that. Again, they're going to make more money when you add space, right? Have I lost you guys again? No? No? Okay. Internet's great when it works, right? Why would a seller prefer sale by owner? Well, first off, they don't have to pay me a commission. And second off, they don't have to be hassled by all these questions about permitted spaces, So Remember what we said the other day, you guys? People buy and sell houses every day without the assistance of a real estate agent. We are not required in this transaction. We got to make ourselves required. We got to make ourselves. We know our market. We're the experts of our industry. We can provide assistance. Some people choose to go for sale by owner. Some people choose to hire an agent, entirely up to them. Did the house sell? Yeah, so so I hate losing a listing for whatever reason. I hate losing a listing, and I will stalk a listing. I want to know who lists it and how much. So I will stalk a listing. Because this was an acquaintance, I'd probably stalk this one a little bit more so than others. And I did see the new deed recorded, and I don't think the buyer got an agent either, which now I kind of feel bad for the buyer when they go to sell, right? Because when they call listing agents, everybody's going to show up and say, tax records say 3-bed, 1-bath. And the buyer's going to say, oh, now I know why she went for sale by owner. And things are going to start clicking, aren't they? As agents get in the way sometimes. So yeah, she did sell. We're still acquaintances. We're still Facebook friends. So just to do a nice side-by-side comparison, building codes are construction standards for safety. The whole point of building codes, again, building codes are statewide, and their whole point is to offer construction code standards for safety. Zoning regulations are local law. They regulate how we use our land. Various things that we can do to use the land. Yeah, through the eyes of the seller, if you can sell at a higher price on permitted space and not have to pay commission, that's a win-win-win for the seller, isn't it? It's up to them if they want to pay our commission. It's up to them if they want to hire us. No requirement whatsoever. Another public land use control. Oh, bless you. How the plan can be used publicly. It is officially allergy season, isn't it? Where are my allergy sufferers out there? My heart goes out to you guys. I know this is a rough time of year and you want to be outside, but it's just not fun, is it? So definitely my heart goes out to you guys. I know this isn't a good time of year. So still talking about public land use controls, how the public or the government can regulate our land. We're going to kind of switch gears for a second to kind of a crappy topic. And we need to talk about on-site septic systems. Let's see what I did there. On-site septic systems. If we can't hook up to public sewer, then we may need to do an on-site septic system. Public sewer, we don't have to worry about it. But if for some reason the city or the county can't or won't hook that property up to public sewer, then we need to be dealing with an on-site septic systems. Approvals and permits from on-site septic systems come from the local county health department. So the health department in your county regulates these. If the land is not yet developed, then the permit is going to show like location of the septic system to the home. We obviously want the septic system downhill from the home, right? We don't want the septic system uphill from the home because like stuff runs down. So we want the location where septic system can go. The permit is also going to list uses that may overload the system. For example, not all on-site septic systems can handle garbage disposals, for example. So if there's limits, things that can overload the system, my parents are on an on-site septic system and my mom can't do you guys ever get like those marathon laundry days where you do like 9 loads in one day? Yeah, my mom can't do that during heavy rain because it's going to overuse the system. It's going to overload the system. So uses. The other thing the permit gives us is capacity. Interesting. I did not know that. The other thing that the permit will give us, I guess that makes sense, Laura, now that I think it through for a second. It gives us capacity limits. The general rule of thumb with on-site septic systems, it doesn't list the number of people. It lists the number of bedrooms. And the general rule of thumb says that we can allow for 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. I say human because this doesn't apply to our 4-legged family members. So 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. If or when you are going to go list a home that's on an on-site septic system, you need to get your hands on that permit to see the number of bedrooms allowed per the permit. And despite the number of bedrooms that you think are in the home, we can only advertise the number as allowed per the permit. 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. So if it's a 3-bedroom house, how many people can support? How many people does that septic system support? It supports 6. Everybody with me? And guys, please understand, when we talk about septics, on-site septics, we're not just talking about bathroom water leaving the house. We're talking about all water that leaves the house, kitchen water, washing machine water, right? It's not just bathroom water. So that's why they give it per the number of bedrooms. They figure each person uses so much water, you know, running the dishwasher, doing laundry, right? All that good stuff. Again, you guys, this is another one of these things that got really important really fast. People bought a home 40 years ago, thought they were buying a 4-bedroom house. Today they go to sell it and the agent's saying, well, the permit only says 3. Do we have some confused people? I bought 4, but you're telling me I have to sell it for 3? So we need to make sure that we're properly disclosing this. I cannot tell you how many times I've been showing property and we're in like a 3-bedroom home with an office or a, you know, a bonus room. And we go into that office and we stand there and we're like, why could we not use this as a bedroom? There's no reason. This would make a perfectly good bedroom. Why aren't they calling it a 4-bedroom instead of a 3-bedroom with an office? Because the septic permit only allows for a 3-bedroom. So before you list the home, you need to get your hands on the septic permit to make sure that you're properly advertising the number of bedrooms. If the seller doesn't have the septic permit, we can contact that county's health department, have somebody come out, check it out, and issue a permit. I have known agents that have had to pay for a septic system or modification after closing because they didn't disclose this properly. Now, I don't know what these systems or modifications go for, but I'm pretty sure that if I'm going to buy one of these, I want to do it for myself and not for somebody else. Anybody else with me? Yeah. So properly disclosing could save your wallet ahead of time. Is it worth taking those couple extra steps to get that permit, seeing what it's advertised for? You better believe it. The scenario of the people buying, I think it was like 15 years ago, they thought they were buying 4 bedrooms. And then the listing agent showed up and said, the permit says 3. That's what I have to list to advertise it for. That scenario, that was a true story from one of my teammates. The seller was just shocked. They were so angry, understandably, totally get it. Why would the agent pay? Because they misrepresented. Because we misrepresented. Guys, put real estate aside for a second. Pretend like real estate doesn't exist. You can sue anybody for anything, can't you? Anybody for anything. The last crazy lawsuit I heard, there was somebody trying to sue Texas Pete because it wasn't made in Texas. You can sue anybody for anything. Literally, you just got to find the right attorney, right? Now bring real estate back into it. If you misrepresent a property and somebody spends $300,000 on it, can they take you to court? Sure. So why would the agent pay? Because they messed up. They didn't properly disclose the information. still got more to talk about with on-site septic systems, and I got a few questions coming in. We'll address those out, but it is time for break. So let's honor our break. When we come back, we'll keep our discussion going about on-site septic systems. Camera's popping back on. Got a couple questions. I'll address those in just a second. This is good stuff, isn't it? Guys, please remember what I said. When you affiliate with your firms, they're going to walk you through this. They're going to give you checklists. You're supposed to, don't worry about getting ready for your listing appointment yet, right? Understand that there's other tools and resources out there to help you. Please always remember, don't put your cart in front of your horse. If you want to go list homes for sale, you first got to get your license. Okay, so rest assured that we're just introducing you to these ideas. So we are taking attendance now. And one question I got in the chat, we were talking about Isaiah, I got you. We were talking about, we have a 3-bedroom with an office where we're trying to wonder why we can't use it a 4-bedroom. Question comes in, what if they decide to turn that office into a bedroom once they buy anyway? Well, I mean, that's fine. They can do that. Our job is to disclose. Our job is to provide the information. What they choose to do with it when they buy it, and I can tell them, look, it's only dedicated for 3. Well, I have 12 people that are going to move in this house. Okay, you just need to understand that your septic system isn't going to support that. You guys with me? So if they want to make it to a 4th bedroom anyway, that's on them, you know, but our job is to disclose, to provide the information. Let's see, what else do I have before we get back into this? We got some internet issues this morning. How do we manage our hours? Well, you guys know when you're here and when you're not, right? So if you miss class, you deduct that time. I also keep up with it. So you're not sure where your hours are right now, just reach out to me outside of class, but you guys can keep up with your hours as well. You know, if you're here better than I do. Another good question, kind of off topic, but not really. How do we designate it as a bedroom? You know, a lot of people say you have to have a closet, you have to have da 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 da. In order to count it as a bedroom, I need ingress and egress. I need a way in and a way out, 2. So a door and a window, for example. Because if you don't have a window and fire catches the house and the fire's on the other side of your bedroom door, you're stuck. So technically, in order to qualify it as a bedroom, I need ingress and egress. There are a lot of older homes, old homes, that don't have closets. They use wardrobes. So a closet is not a requirement. Question about the sewer system. Is it the same for public? No, this is only on-site septic systems. If it's public, you know, go nuts, right? The city can deal with that. But this is only for on-site septic systems. These are buried on the property somewhere. So what just happened there? We have to verify the number of bedrooms allowed per the permit, again, before we make any representations. Despite what the seller says, and they will argue with you, and I get it. I bought this as a 4-bedroom, and now you're going to tell me I got to sell it as a 3. But we have got to make sure that we're properly disclosing the information. Failure to do so could result, as we said, you could be sued. I mean, you can always be sued. You can be sued for anything. But it could also result in disciplinary action by the Real Estate Commission. Remember, the Real Estate Commission regulates your license. And remember, the Real Estate Commission's main purpose is to protect the public. So if you harm their public, they could discipline your license. We're going to talk about the disciplinary action when we get to Unit 7. How do we keep ourselves out of what we refer to as real estate jail? How do we keep ourselves out of disciplinary action? This is why we're here. This is why we're going over the laws and the rules, and to give you guys that foundation to help keep you out of trouble. My job is to help you. I feel like my job is twofold. I mean, technically, my job is to help you guys get your license. But the second piece of that, the underlying piece of that, hopefully I'm helping you guys keep your license once you get it. And that's why we're here in this class, is this introduction, this foundation to build your career. So we're going to talk more about disciplinary action, misrepresenting, all that good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff to come in Unit 7. Another thing we may encounter out some of these homes out in the middle of nowhere, you may come across something called straight piping. This is just directing water directly from the home into a nearby creek or stream. I think the most common example of when we might see straight piping might be a washing machine. I don't think the whole home is hooked up to run out into the creek, right? But I think where this comes up the most often, if you come across this, if you see a pipe coming out the house into a nearby creek or stream, then that's a material fact. We have to disclose it. And we need to let the seller know, or your buyer, depending on who you're working with, that that's not allowed. There's proper ways to drain water, and straight piping is not one of them. Questions on on-site septic systems. By the way, it amazes me how many people don't know if they're on an on-site septic system or public sewer. So when you're at that listing appointment, you ask the seller, because you got your checklist from your firm, remember? So you got your checklist and you're going through and you say, are you on public sewer or on-site septic system? And the seller says, I don't know. How do I find out? Just have them pull out their water bill. If they pay for sewer, they're on public. If they don't, there's a tank somewhere buried in that, on that land. And that's when we can contact the health department. We're starting to see community septic systems pop up. So maybe in a new subdivision. So then that would be regulated by the HOA. Typically regulated by the HOA. Make sure I can see you guys, please. Another public land use control are flood hazards. Flood hazards are just areas designated by FEMA that are prone to flooding. Maybe they flooded once, maybe they flood 100 times or every time it rains. FEMA is our Federal Emergency Management Agency. Don't get too bogged down on this right now. We're going to talk more about flood hazard in our insurance unit, which is Unit 13. So we'll see this again. What we need to understand right now is that there are areas that may be prone to flooding, in which case how we use the land needs to be regulated. If the property, if the structure is in the flood hazard, then the homeowner may be required to purchase flood insurance. And I'm telling you right now, flood insurance ain't cheap. I think my Outer Banks person can agree with me. Yeah, it ain't cheap. So if you're not down at the coast, that's okay. We still have creeks and rivers and streams and lakes and ponds, right? So if the property is close to a body of water, and we know how it goes in a heavy downpour, right? You know, streams become creeks, creeks become rivers, rivers become these angrily gushing, flowing, you know, and that's where our little red flag goes up. Again, talking more about this and FEMA and all that good stuff when we get to Unit 13. Good. Good. Highway access is a public land use control. Highway access is a material fact. It's something we have to disclose. If they plan on, if DOT is going to come in and do new construction for highways, freeways, belt loops. Again, I ask, where are my Winston-Salem people, my Kernersville people? How's that belt loop coming along? They are still working on that thing, aren't they? I'm proud to say I finally start to see, because I'm in High Point. So when I go to Winston, I go down 74 usually, old 311, 74. And they're starting construction, and that's the bottom end of it. So we're seeing progress on that thing. But if you ever look at a map of that belt loop, it affects a lot of properties. And that's something that needs to be disclosed, any planned construction. Your resource to find this out, ncdot.com, or Google North Carolina Department of Transportation. They will list current projects in the state, proposed projects. Oh, I had a listing once. It was near the Belt Loop. It's not on it, but it's near it. It was in Kernersville. The backyard butted up to Business 40, which is now 421 Salem Parkway. And whatever, you could walk out on the back deck and see Business 40, whatever, you could see that. You could look at a map and see that. That wasn't the issue. The issue was because of this new belt loop is close enough that one day, I don't know when, it hasn't happened yet, but one day there will be an exit or an entrance ramp to 421. And it's not on the property, but it's like super close to the property. That's what I had to disclose, the thing that wasn't there yet. Doesn't that buyer have a right to know that one day there will be a ramp close to your property? Whatever, you can see the highway. Look, it's right there. You could hear it. They had outdoor speakers hooked up, so you didn't have to listen to the road noise. It was nice. But what we had to disclose is what wasn't there yet. Does this make sense? So again, part of your checklist when you're getting ready for a listing, I hope what you guys are hearing me say are there are a whole bunch of outside sources we need to go investigate before we list. Remember what we just said about the developer? There's a whole lot of work that goes on before we ever see that equipment. Guess what? With the listing agent, there's a whole lot of work that happens before you ever see the home for sale on Zillow. Does that make sense? And we're investigating, we're researching this, and that's where you're going to get checklists from your firms to know where to go, what to look for. Another public land use control areas known as wetlands. With these areas, the groundwater is just close to the surface, so it's susceptible to flooding. The water's already there. We tend to see these more down east, the further east we go. But there's just various controls. They're highly regulated, help protect the land, help protect critters that live in the land. Questions on public land use control. Remember, public land use control is enforced by the government, by the local government. If you see any violations, if your neighbor opens up that hair salon in their garage and you know darn well that it's not allowed in zoning, call the cops. It's enforced by the government. The second part of this unit is private land use controls, and that's where our HOAs come into place. HOA subdivisions may have covenants. Now, these are one of these fun things that you can hear several different things that mean the same thing. Restrictive covenants are the same thing as protective covenants, or the same thing as CCRs. Covenants are going to be on public record. So if you're going to buy in a subdivision with covenants, they should be available. If the seller doesn't have them, we can go find them. The whole point of covenants is to help maintain the standards, help maintain the value of the property. I need everybody to understand all covenants are different. There is no one flat across the board covenant. Some may tell you there are certain colors you can paint your front door. Some may tell you there's certain materials you can use to build the fence. Some may tell you the grass in your front yard can't be any taller than 6 inches, for example. They're all different. They're all different. Some people like covenants because it maintains standards. Some people don't because they're restrictive. Tell you what you can do and how you can use your land. It comes down to personal preference. I'm pretty sure, I'm already seeing it in the chat. I'm pretty sure when I flip this slide, I could divide this class into 2 different categories. Those of you that went, ew, look at that house. And the rest of us went, ooh, look at that house. If you don't like it, you may want to consider a covenant. If you don't want to live next door to the Pepto-Bismol house, you may want to consider being in an HOA with restrictions. Now, I don't know, they're all different, but I'm pretty sure covenants are not going to allow this color for exterior. If this doesn't bother you, then maybe you don't need an HOA. Again, they're all different, you guys. Some will tell them if you can or cannot park the driveway or park the RV in the driveway. Some will tell you if you can or cannot park on the street. They're all different. These are not imposed by the city. They are private, which means they're imposed by the HOA. They're imposed by the developer. So when the developer comes in and creates the subdivision, they create the covenants, they create the laws. And a violation of a covenant is reported to the HOA. Do not call the cops if your neighbor paints their front door an unauthorized color. Don't call the cops. You contact the HOA. You let the HOA deal with it. How are they going to deal with it? I don't know. They're all different. Maybe they'll take you to court. Maybe they'll fine you every day that the house is a different color or the front door isn't the right color. How they enforce it is also privately regulated. Remember back in Unit 4, we were talking about that fence. What do we say about the fence? Is the fence allowed? I don't know yet. The only thing I know by looking at a fence is that somebody put a fence there. So let's say you're showing property to a buyer and you guys are in a subdivision with covenants and you walk out back, you're looking at the backyard with the buyer and the buyer sees that the neighbor has a fence. And the buyer says, oh, good. I was going to ask you if I could put a fence up, but I see that they're doing it. So I know I'm allowed to do it too. Just because the neighbor has a fence up, does that necessarily mean it's allowed? Just because the neighbor has a shed, does that necessarily mean it's allowed? We could be, guys, we don't know. That neighbor could be in the throes of a lawsuit with that HOA about that fence or that shed. They could be fined every day that that fence is up. Are you guys with me? So just because we see a fence in a subdivision does not mean it's allowed. Just because we see a shed, just because we see an RV parked in the driveway, the only way to know for sure is to get our hands on those covenants and help that buyer verify that they're allowed. So private land use control are our covenants. Again, typically their point is to preserve the value. So they may have property maintenance. I have heard of some, like I said, there's the covenants say that the grass in your front yard can't get any taller than the next amount. And then you got that neighbor that needs a hobby and they're running around with their yardstick, measuring everybody's grass in their front yard. People are fun, aren't they? Making sure you're in regulation, making sure that your front yard didn't get any higher than it needed to. And again, the covenants, they're all different, but they may tell you where you can and can't park, whether or not you can have a fence or a shed. Are there certain architectural designs? They may make your mailbox look a certain way. They're all different. Covenants are imposed and created by the developer. So when the developer creates a subdivision, they create the covenants, they create the rules. Covenants are appurtenant. What does appurtenant mean? They run with the land. So when the developer builds the last house and they leave, the covenants stay. When the first person buys, they follow those covenants. The third person, the eighth person, etc. They run with the land. I think a common misconception says that we only have to follow the rules of the covenants as long as the developer is around. But that's not true. They are there for many, many, many years after the developer because they're appurtenant. They run with the land, not the developer. Does that make sense? So helping your buyers get your hands on those. Again, there's owners associations, also known as HOAs, homeowners associations. Maybe the HOA has a property management company to regulate that subdivision, that area. Maybe the individual property owners. They all take turns being president, vice president, treasurer, secretary. It's how it's created by the developer. The developer lays the law of the land. And covenants can't be for anything that is illegal. And it might be, we don't have shady developers, but it might be that once upon a time ago, it was legal. But if the law changes, then these are now illegal and they can't be enforced. For example, there were subdivisions created back in the 50s, early 60s that may have said that a certain class of people can't live in this subdivision. A certain class of people can't live in this community. Today, thanks to fair housing, that's not allowed. Today, that is illegal. Thus, that covenant is not enforceable. I got a whole unit dedicated to fair housing. We're going to talk about fair housing in Unit 19. We're going to talk about who the protected classes are and what that means to us as real estate agents. Again, they're private, meaning they're not enforced by the government. If you call the police and say, there's an RV parked in my neighbor's driveway, the cops are going to say, so you need to call the HOA. And honestly, you guys, I think that is the most important thing about private and public land use controls is understanding who enforces them. Public is enforced by the government, private is enforced by the owners association created by the development. Sometimes we have conflicts. Sometimes zoning says one thing and covenants say something else. Again, you guys, put real estate aside just for 1 second. Let's just pretend that real estate doesn't exist. Anytime, every time you have conflicting laws, conflicting rules, the more strict of the two will prevail. So now bring real estate into it. Zoning says one thing, covenant says something else. We have conflicting information. Which one is going to win? The more restrictive of the two. Maybe the area is zoned for residential and commercial, but the covenants say residential only. Which one is more strict? Covenants. Am I allowed to build a commercial building in this subdivision? Even though zoning allows it, the covenants are more strict, so they will prevail. Questions on private land use control? Yes. Go. I'm not going to say I hate this world we live in today, but apparently we just had somebody leave class. They got a text that there's an active shooter, Forsyth County. Text alert. She said, I got to go. I said, go. Guys, I hate this. Why are we doing this to our kids? Stop it. Okay. Unit 6, private and public land use controls. Let's talk about what this means to us. Let's bring this back home for us. Our responsibility as the broker. You guys see on page 126 and 127. 126 and 127. You guys see where it says responsibility of real estate brokers? Everybody see that? I think you should read that. It's just my opinion. If you haven't read it yet, I think you should read it again. Anytime throughout your book, again, you guys, we're bringing us into it now. We're starting to bring us and our roles and responsibilities. So anytime in your book that you see something about responsibilities of the brokers, I think that's what we need to read. So 126 and 127, as we said, we have a duty to review land use controls before listing the property or writing an offer. So it depends on who you're working with. Are you working with the seller or are you working with the buyer? But we have a duty to help verify these land use controls. Verify that your buyer's end use will be allowed. Again, if it's important to my buyer, of specific importance to my buyer, I now have a duty to make sure that they can use the property in the way that they're intended. You want to convert your garage into a hair salon? Great. Let me help you check on that and make sure it's allowed. You want to open a daycare in your home? Great. Let me check on that and make sure it's allowed. Part of the reason why when we work with buyers, we ask a lot of questions, and I'm not being nosy. I'm just making sure that I understand how you intend to use this property, because if you want to use it in a certain way, my job is to help you make sure that you can. And this is another one of these. You guys are going to start hearing me say stuff, if you haven't yet. I don't remember if I have or not, but you're going to hear me start saying stuff about staying in your lane. I am a fact finder. My job is to help my buyers and sellers get this information in their hand. I do not interpret legal documents. I cannot read that 40-page covenant and say, all right, guys, this is what this means. My job is to help them get it. My job is not to help them interpret it. Is everybody with me? Interpreting land use controls is the job of an attorney. Interpreting land use controls, covenants, for example, if we got a bunch of questions about the covenants, either get them to the HOA or get them to an attorney. I am a fact finder. I help get them the information that they need so they can make an informed decision. Guys, here's the deal. It's my job to know the parameters of my job. It's not my buyer's job to know what I can and can't do. Buyers are going to come to you all the time and say, what does this mean? It's my job to know my job, not theirs. And this is where we need to be prepared on what we can and can't do, what it means to stay in my lane. So you help your buyers and sellers get their hands on these covenants. And if they have questions, we either direct them to the HOA or direct them to an attorney. Let them interpret them. Also for brokers, we have to advise all consumers of any covenants that could affect their use and enjoyment of the property. I want everybody to note the word consumer. Consumer in this case is referring to the entire public. Whether or not they hire you or not. We're going to talk about what it means to be hired, how we can further divide the public. That's what we're getting into in Unit 7. But we have a duty to advise all consumers of covenants, ordinances, things that could affect how they want to use the property. Also for us, we need to advise our consumers if the property is subject to an owners association. Is it in an HOA? If so, how much are the dues and how are the dues paid? Are they paid monthly? Are they paid quarterly? Are they paid annually? Are there any proposed special assessments? I know back in Unit 3, we talked about government special assessments when we're talking about lien priority and superior liens. HOAs can issue an assessment as well. Maybe the roads are private and they need to repave them. They can put out a special assessment to the homeowners on that road. If you're in a condominium or a townhome, maybe they need to redo the roofs or the vinyl siding or repave the parking lot. So helping them get this information so they know what they're getting into. We need to advise consumers to carefully look over the covenants. If there's any owners association, if it's in a HOA. Again, we're fact finders. I can help put this in their hands. I'm not going to interpret it for them. The recommendation is we try to get these things in their hands before we go under, before they sign the offer, before they present the offer. That's not always possible. I don't know. I think I asked this earlier, but if anybody's tried to buy a house in the last couple of years, things happened fast. But that still didn't negate our responsibilities. That didn't negate our responsibilities to do our jobs. Some listing agents will put the covenants in the multiple listing services. So you can see it as an attachment before you ever show the property. Others won't. There's no requirement. There's no rule that says you have to. As a listing agent, me personally, and this is just my personal opinion, not going to be tested on my personal opinion, but me personally, I like to make my listings easy to sell. So I'm going to put the covenants in. I'm going to put the information in because I want buyers to buy it. That's my thinking. Others don't think the same way I do, and that's fine. So if they're not available, let's go find them. Let's go do the public record search. Again, if they have questions, send them to the HOA or send them to their closing attorney to make sure that they're properly being interpreted. And also in this unit, we started introducing you guys to the idea of red flags. And we're going to be talking about little red flags pretty much from here on out. And as real estate agents, we need to constantly be on alert for red flags. I am helping my buyers and sellers see things that they're not looking at. For the people on this call that bought a home, have ever bought a home, is this safe to say the first time you went in that home, you maybe went in it with rose-colored glasses, and maybe you weren't looking at specifics. Maybe you walked in that front door and you were looking at, how does this home fit my family's lifestyle? Can I see us doing Sunday brunch here? Can I see us doing Friday night family game night here? That's how a buyer sees a property when they're first looking. You and I can help that buyer by looking at everything else. Look up at the ceiling, look at the walls, look at the floors, look at the things that your buyers may not be looking at. We have two different objectives going into this property. I'm not the one buying this house. Buyers ask me all the time, what do you think? Well, I don't think my opinion really matters. I don't know you guys well, but I'd be willing to say that our family dynamics are different. So wouldn't it stand to reason that what may work for my family doesn't work for yours? So what does my opinion matter? Very little. What I want my buyers to find are things that work for them. And when I see something, say something. When you see a crack, when you see a stain in the ceiling, when you see something, say something. They may not be seeing it. And that's what we need to be doing as agents, is constantly being on the lookout for little red flags. Little red flags are indicators that we need to investigate. We need to research. We need to ask some questions. We need to get some more information. I'll tell you, I learned about what buyers see as a buyer's agent. And I was with a buyer and we were going through the home. And I got in the kitchen, we got in the kitchen, and I noticed there must have been a really, really big dog that lived there. And it must have been contained to the kitchen because every single baseboard was dug up, gnawed on, chewed on. Those baseboards were some big dog's chew toy. I made a comment. I was like, oh my gosh, you're going to get new baseboards. And my buyer was like, what? Huh? Baseboards? Huh? She wasn't looking at that. She walked into the kitchen through the eyes of, can I see me preparing meals for my family in this room? Does that make sense? So they're seeing it through the perspective one way. You and I are seeing, and it was pretty dang obvious. I mean, it's not like they were small scratches and gnaw marks. I mean, it was a big dog, but that's not the perspective that she was seeing. And that was my aha moment. Luckily, that was early in my sales career. And that was my aha moment, that I need to be helping the buyer see the things that they're not seeing. We talked about flood hazards a few minutes ago. I don't know if it's in a flood hazard. I'm not FEMA. I don't know if it's in a flood hazard or not. But if I see a creek or a river or a stream or a lake or a pond, can't my little red flag go up to prompt me to investigate, prompt me to go check out a flood map and see if it's in a flood zone? Are you guys with me? These are the things that we need to be looking for. So we're going to start talking more and more and more about your little red flags and the importance of paying attention. And again, it's the old adage, if you see something, say something. Help the buyer see the things that they're not. The last little piece of Unit 6 real quick, is just about government-owned land. It's estimated that the government owns about 30% of the continental United States. Just an estimate. But the government does own land for various purposes. Parks can be heavily regulated, national regulation, state regulation. Try to preserve our parks, preserve our green. And that gets us through Unit 6. Those key terms are back on page 109. Again, a lot of what you're going to see on those key terms are those zoning terms we went over the other day. Your key point review starts on page 128. It's a review. It's a checklist. Go through that review. I know this, I know that. I don't really know this. Go look it up. And then your student quiz, page 130. There is a quiz in the Unit 6 material in the online learning system. And then, as I mentioned, there's that Q&A brochure on subdivisions and streets. Again, those aren't, nothing in the online learning system is required. Everything there is just to help you guys enhance your knowledge, help you to wrap your brain around it. I can tell you that. Sure. It's not about the number of pages. It's about the material. Any questions on Unit 6? Public land use controls, private land use controls. We may own the property fee simple absolute, but we're still regulated in some senses on how we can use it. It sounds nice to have the highest form of ownership, but that may not always be the case. Okay. Up next, Unit 20. We're skipping around just a bit. Unit 20 in your book starts on page 497. How many, be honest with me, how many of you read Unit 20 before today? How many of you? Few of you. Not as many hands as what I saw on the first day. So please remember to look ahead. We're going to talk about Unit 7 in just a second. I'm going to beg you to look ahead at Unit 7. But Unit 20 is about our environmental issues. For those of you that looked at Unit 20, this is the unit that makes us terrified to breathe the air that we breathe, doesn't it? We're going to talk about some environmental issues, some concerns, and how it affects us, the public, and of course our consumers, our buyers and sellers. So the roadmap for Unit 20 is pretty simple. We're going to talk about some basic environmental hazards, things that we need to be aware of. Again, red flags are all over this unit. I'm not an environmental hazard expert, but I'm looking for signs. I'm looking for things that make my little red flag go up so I can encourage my client to investigate further and learn more. Also, please note the word basic. We're not an environmental hazard school. We're just introducing you to some of these things that we may encounter. Before we get into this unit, will you guys please look with me on page 499? 499. And 499, we have a picture of a house, the scariest house I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't think you're going to find a house with every single environmental hazard. So I think this is just a picture. What it's going to show us is where we might find some of these environmental hazards. I have had buyers with properties with some of these environmental hazards. If you wanted to buy this house on page 499 and I were your agent, I would probably advise you not to do it because it's bad. It's got everything. Again, I don't think we're going to see everything everywhere, but what this picture illustrates to us is where we might find these environmental issues. So first off, let's talk about why this is important to us. Well, This is a thing of growing importance in real estate transactions. This is why we need to be alert. We need to be paying attention to those little red flags if we suspect some environmental issues. Again, we're talking a little bit more about material facts in this unit with the deep dive in material facts in Unit 7. But the importance, why does this matter to us? Guys, once we learn of an environmental issue, we've got to disclose it. So looking for these signs, we learn of these materials, it's something, it's material fact that needs to be disclosed. And the reason it's important to us in real estate is because environmental issues are health issues. Health issues deal with people. Do you know who I'm working with to help buy and sell houses? People. So we need to be aware, make sure that they're making that informed decision to buy or sell. Help point them in the right direction so they know where to investigate and where to learn about these issues. Anything environmental issue, it typically starts with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. In your career, please don't go to this site right now, wait till after class. But in your career, if you come across an environmental issue, the number one question is, where do I go or where do I send my client? And I think that generally speaking, the best place to start is the EPA's website. So I've been babbling on about material facts. I know we're going to get, like I said, we're doing a deep dive in Unit 7, but we're going to be talking more and more about these things in Unit 20 generally. So let's just go into this unit with a very basic understanding of material facts. It's just anything that a reasonable person would recognize as relevant when they're trying to make a decision. That seems awfully broad, doesn't it? If you were to Google material facts, this is probably what you're going to find. One thing when we get into in Unit 7, we're going to learn that the Real Estate Commission has taken this big, broad definition and broken it down into specifics. And they've given us some things that are specifically material facts. And environmental issues are going to fall under those specifically material facts things. So again, just keep in mind, we'll do our deep dive in material facts next week. So let's start talking about some of the super scary things you may encounter, these environmental issues. And the first one you may encounter is something called asbestos. Asbestos typically can be found as an insulation, maybe wrapped around pipes to help insulate them. Asbestos was banned from building materials in 1978. Now, you don't need to know that year as it relates to asbestos. You do need to know that year as it relates to something else that we're getting to. But the reason I mention the years, because anything built today, anything built after 1978, we don't have to worry about, we don't have to deal with. Now, if you have an older home, if you're helping a buyer or seller with an older home, I'm not guaranteeing that there's asbestos in the home. You're saying there may be. And this is where we need to be on alert, looking for those little red flags. As long as asbestos is intact, it's fine. No problem whatsoever. Asbestos doesn't become a problem until it becomes friable. And friable asbestos is what you're looking at in this picture. You see how this is like hanging down and it's all broken up? This is not good asbestos. When the asbestos is friable, it releases little particles in the air, the material in the air. You and I breathe the air, those little particles get into our lungs, and now we start dealing with respiratory issues. Have you guys seen attorney commercials? And I feel like I botch this word up every time. But the attorney commercials on TV, do you or someone you know suffer from mesothelioma? Y'all know that word you hear on TV? Yeah, mesothelioma. Yeah, that's what we're dealing with here is exposure to asbestos, long-term exposure to asbestos. Removal may not be the best treatment for asbestos because when you remove it, you tend to disturb it and break it up further. So depending on the situation, of course, the best remedy for asbestos might be encapsulation, which just could be wrapping it up. Interesting. Interesting. My elementary school had asbestos and they treated it one summer when we weren't there. I mean, my elementary school, the whole summer, it looked like a circus tent, right? It was covered. I don't know what they were doing in there, but they let us come back in the fall and I'm still here to talk about it. So obviously I think what they were doing, I know what they were doing was treating and probably encapsulating or removing that asbestos. Questions on asbestos? Interesting. All right, let's take 10. We come back. We'll talk about some more environmental issues. Welcome back. We're back. All right. So I'm going to take attendance. So we talked about asbestos. By the way, this unit, again, is very basic, just introducing us to various topics. Not a heavily tested unit, but you can expect to see a question or two, nothing crazy. I have taken attendance. So if you're coming back, thank you. Please let me know. So we talked about the first super scary thing, which is asbestos. Next super scary thing is lead. Lead, and specifically lead poisoning, can be found in lead-based paint. It could also be found in dust from lead pipes or lead solder. Solder is that connecting metal that connects two things, kind of weld it together, that solder it together. Lead poisoning can affect developing organs. So where lead is a concern is with our children and pregnant women. Those little developing bodies. The best resource we can give our buyers and tenants is this pamphlet from the EPA called Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. What are things we can do to reduce that risk, help educate the consumer on lead and the potential dangers of it. You can either go to the EPA's website after class and get this. Your firm will also have it available to you guys as well, so you can share it with your buyers and tenants. Anybody with children that's going to live there needs to be aware of the dangers, the possible dangers. Lead was banned in residential property in 1978. You need to know this year as it relates to lead. You need to know this year. Anything built after 1978, shouldn't find lead in. Anything built prior to 1978, I'm not telling you it's got lead in it. What I am saying is, whoa, whoa, my little red flag went up because of the year that it was built. Buyers can have it tested. They get we'll call it a period where they can do their investigations and their inspections. We will talk about that. Buyers have the right to have it tested if they choose. If anybody is selling their home, well, first off, hang on, I got ahead of myself. I apologize. I was here and then I started talking about something else. So I'm gonna make sure you guys are caught up to me. Welcome to the Mind of Julie. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, everybody with me? So it was banned prior to 1978, thing built prior to 1978. If it was built prior to 1978, we have a form, and the form is referred to as a lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum. Remember earlier we said an amendment is a change? There's another type of form that we're going to meet in the contract world that's called an addendum. And when you guys see the word addendum, I actually want you to see the word add. An addendum adds to and becomes part of the contract, the offer and the contract. So if the home was built prior to 1978, our offer and our contract will include the lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum. This form does not say it was built prior to 1978, thus it has lead in it. This form says because it was built prior to 1978, it may have lead in it. Thank you. If the owner, maybe this is a for sale or a for rent situation, if the owner knows of any presence of lead in the home, this is one of the few things that the seller has to disclose. Talking more about that in Unit 7. So if the owner knows of lead in the home, maybe they hired contracting work. the contractors came in and did the work. And one of those subcontractors were the painters. That, if it was built prior to 1978, contractors have a duty to have it tested, have it inspected. If there is lead in the home, then the owner is going to receive reports. If they're do-it-yourselfers, if they paint it on their own, maybe they know that they could have had it tested, maybe they don't. By the way, painting over lead-based paint does not make the lead go away. So you can't slap a fresh coat of paint on it and poof, we no longer have lead issues. A fair statement. You can only disclose what you know, right? I can't disclose what I don't know. So if the owner doesn't know, if they were do-it-yourselfers and they painted themselves, they may not know. However, like I said, if they had contracting work and it was built prior to 1978, that should have been addressed. Lead-based paint identifies these homes as built prior to 1978 as target housing. So target housing is anything that may be built prior to 1978. Again, I'm not telling you it's got lead in it. What I'm telling you is because of the year that it was built, it may have lead in it. There are a couple exceptions to target housing, anything built after 78, of course. But in addition to that, any housing for elderly people would not be required to follow the lead-based paint laws. Remember, we just said lead affects developing bodies, developing organs. So if it was built primarily for elderly, then lead wouldn't be a concern. Another exception is going to be 0-bedroom dwellings. When I say 0-bedroom dwellings, think studio apartments, dorm rooms, military barracks, that kind of thing. They would be exempt as well. Lead-based paint hazard management program. Again, if you're a contractor, if you're doing renovations and you expect to get paid for it, then you've got some training. You know, have some different regulations to have it checked out, have it inspected to see if there is in fact lead in the home. Reports will be made available. The owner is required to disclose that information once they know. Fines for the contractor, failure to have it inspected or failure to have it reported. They could be being fined not only by the state, but also by the Environmental Protection Agency. So there's a program in place meant to manage these contractors, make sure that they have the proper training for handling it, make sure that they're having it inspected. Once again, do-it-yourselfers may or may not know that they can have it tested. You can only disclose what we know. So when it comes to lead in the home, what's this mean to us? What's our responsibility? Well, once we learn of something, we need to disclose it, and that also involves lead. Guys, we can't put our head in the sand. Once we see it, we can't unsee it. Once we hear it, we can't unhear it. Once we learn it, we can't unlearn it. You guys with me? Once we learn, maybe the seller tells you, they provide the reports. Maybe the buyer has it tested. Once we learn, however we learn of lead in the home, that becomes something that we have to disclose. Again, we got that addendum, the lead-based paint hazard addendum. Another big responsibility to us is to make sure that our owners, our sellers understand that they have to disclose what they know about lead. We're going to learn in Unit 7 that sellers don't have to disclose much at all. Disclosing lead is like the exception to the rule. Sellers have to disclose what they know when it comes to lead. It's a seller disclosure, which means they disclose, and then the buyer has to acknowledge when we go under contract, acknowledge that they've received the disclosure. And when it comes to that form, that addendum, our responsibility is making sure that everybody's in compliance. Questions on lead? No. Fresh coat of paint does not make the lead go away. It's still there. You just paint it over it. Prepare your sellers, you guys. This has freaked some people out in the past. If the buyer wants to have it inspected or investigate, the home inspector is going to come in and they're going to chip up some of the paint to send it in to the lab. It's usually around a windowsill or a door frame. But let your buyers know, or I'm sorry, let your sellers know. To test it, they got to chip it up. And a fresh coat of paint doesn't change it. You still got lead. Another super scary thing we have, and this is found everywhere, is radon. Radon is odorless, it's colorless. Radon is a gas that comes up from the ground. Specifically, radon is the result of decaying matters in the ground. So as things decay, they release a gas. They're looking for cracks in the earth to release the gas. And if the crack in the earth that the gas is being released happens to be under a home, then we're dealing with radon levels in the property. Radon is everywhere. Because you can't see it, because you can't smell it, because you can't taste it, the only way to know for sure if you have radon in your home is to have it tested. Most home inspectors are certified to test for radon. I have heard of some do-it-yourself test kits that you can get at like Lowe's or Home Depot. I don't know how accurate they are. Buyers should be encouraged to have it tested for radon as part of their contract process. The EPA sets radon levels at 4.0 picocuries is that word. And the EPA says anything over 4.0 picocuries is considered undesirable. Ventilation can sometimes help if it's a vacant home or a new construction. Let me say this, homes are meant to breathe. Homes are meant to have people live there and have doors open and close, have HVAC units kick on and off, windows open and close, right? Homes were designed to be ventilated. But if you have a tightly sealed home, again, new construction, vacant, where doors aren't opening and closing on a regular basis, you may have higher levels of radon than if you did if somebody lived there and that door opened and closed every day, multiple times a day. If ventilation doesn't resolve it, then we can have a radon mitigation system installed. And that's what you're looking at. You guys see this white pipe coming out of the side of this house, up the house. That's what we're looking at right there is a radon mitigation system. So this thing is drilled into the crawl space and there's little fans that pull the air out of the crawl space. And instead of that radon, that air going into the home, they're sending it out into the atmosphere where it belongs anyway. Radon mitigation systems vary in costs. Buyers, when they have it tested and it comes in over 4.0 picocuries, they can ask the seller to put in the radon mitigation system. Another thing we're going to learn in Unit 7, in North Carolina, sellers don't have to fix anything. They don't have to fix a thing. So the buyer can ask the seller to put in a radon mitigation system. Does the seller have to do it? No, they don't have to. More on that coming in Unit 7. Oops. Matt, this is just a quick map. Let's see, this was 2017, but again, it just kind of gives us the deeper purple tends to have a higher level of radon than the lighter purple. We tend to see more high levels of radon in our mountains versus our coast. Think about the difference in the ground. It's sandier down at the coast, isn't it? It's rockier up in the mountains. So a lot of this, and you may have your house tested and it come back with low radon. That means absolutely nothing for your neighbor. So don't just think if your neighbor has it tested, oh, my radon is good. Don't assume that you're good. A radon mitigation specialist. Who does that? There are people that specialize in mitigating radon. There's a career for that. If you have never had it tested, if you live in a home and you've never had it tested, you absolutely can still do it. If you currently live in a home with a radon mitigation system, you may want to consider having it tested every, I don't know, 5-10 years. The reason being, I'm going to go back for 1 second. These little fans and these pipes don't last forever. They may be warranted, but they don't last forever. So if the fans stop working, then they're not pulling the air out anymore. I was with buyers once and we were in the basement and we saw a radon mitigation system. It was in place. I mean, we talked about it. We pointed at it. We had a conversation about it. And my buyers opted to still have it tested for radon. And it came back at like 6 point something. Nothing to get too excited about, but it is higher than 4.0. I called the listing agent called the seller called their radon mitigation guy. He came out and looked, lo and behold, those little fans had stopped working. He fixed it, we had it retested, now we're back down to 2 something, it's all good. Had my buyers that not had, they bought that house, but had they not had that tested, we wouldn't know that those little fans. So I say that for you, if you do have a radon mitigation system in your home, consider having it tested periodically, just because those little fans don't last forever. So when it comes to radon, what's our responsibility? The Real Estate Commission says that we're required to disclose any known presence of radon 4.0 picocuries or higher. So once the buyer learns that it's 4.0 picocuries or higher, they ask the seller to remedy it. The seller says, no, I'm not going to do it. The buyer may choose to terminate because of that. That's their right. We're going to talk about the buyer's right to terminate when we get into our contracts. If the buyer terminates because of this and we learn this, I now have a material fact that I have to disclose. So the house goes back on the market. If I'm the listing agent, I now have a duty to disclose the radon test came in higher. It's worth having a conversation with the sellers. If you're the listing agent, you find out it tested, radon tested for higher than 4.0 picocuries. Buyer's agent calls you and says they're going to terminate. Talk to your seller. Like, look, let's reconsider fixing this because it's going to come up again with the next buyer, right? It's not going to go away on its own. Doesn't matter if the seller does it or not. I still have that duty to disclose once I learn about it. If I learn about it. If I don't know about it, I can't disclose it. The Real Estate Commission also says that just because we see a radon mitigation system in place is nothing to get excited about. The mitigation system is not the material fact. However, if we see a mitigation system, our little red flag should go up to encourage us to ask questions. For example, when was the last time you had those little fans tested? When was the last time you had the radon levels tested? Same thing with my buyers. Yes, we saw a radon mitigation system, but I encourage them to still have it tested for radon so they know. And it was something that was addressed, that was taken care of before they bought the house. By the time they moved in, it was a non-issue. Questions on radon? Have you guys ever seen these tests, the radon test kit? If you ever had it tested, anybody ever had it tested? So they set this contraction up in the home and it takes like a snapshot of the radon level every hour on the hour. And it does it for like 2 or 3 days. And then at the end of the 2 or 3 days, it gives us an average. And if that average is over 4.0 picocuries, that's where we have the issue. Another environmental issue, dealing with formaldehyde. This is usually found in our pressed wood. So plywood, pressed wood, particle board. Sometimes we can find it in certain glues, maybe used in furniture, to build furniture. Where are my High Point people? We got a furniture market coming up soon, don't we? I don't have to look at a calendar to know when it's time for furniture market. I just got to try to drive down Main Street. I know. I know it's here. I know it's coming. I think I heard once that 80,000 people come into the Triad twice a year for furniture market. Definitely noticed an increase in the population. Formaldehyde could cause respiratory problems. Again, it's just a warning. They're still building with it. There's just a warning out. I had a pre-licensing student last year say she bought a bed and it came with a big red warning sticker, may contain formaldehyde. She's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Research it, investigate it. Go to Google, go to EPA. Another super scary environmental thing we have, and this one is the one that scares me the most. It's carbon monoxide poisoning. Carbon monoxide is known as the silent killer. It's not uncommon for victims of carbon monoxide to go to sleep at night and just never wake up. Carbon monoxide is the result of, you got an incomplete fuel combustion, and that gas released from the incomplete fuel combustion is getting it out in the air. We're breathing it. Carbon monoxide detectors exist. A lot of times today you can buy a joint carbon monoxide and smoke detector. If you guys don't have a carbon monoxide detector in your home, please put it on your shopping list for this weekend. You guys remember the hotel in Boone 9 years ago, 10 years ago? You guys remember this? Two families died due to carbon monoxide poisoning. The first one, they were like, oh, that's weird. The second one, they were like, we need to investigate this. Two. So carbon monoxide detectors. Another environmental issue is our electromagnetic fields. Anywhere near our electrical currents, our power lines, our EMFs, electromagnetic fields. The jury's still out about the health implications on living around electromagnetic fields for a long period of time. What is the damage? What could be the damage? A lot of these things we're still learning. I mean, let's think about this for a second. When we start using lead in our paint, the reason we were using lead in our paint back in the day was because it was a quick drying agent. You didn't have to wait as long for it to dry. And when we first started using lead, we didn't know it was bad. We didn't know it harmed us. But once we learned, we stopped. So some things, unfortunately, you guys, it takes time to learn if there are any major health complications. It's been my experience, buyers either have a problem with living near a power pole or a power line, or they don't. So it could come down to personal preference. If they have any concerns, they can reach out to the power company and have an EMF, electromagnetic field test, EMF. So if there are concerns, yeah. It takes us a while sometimes to get on it, doesn't it? I guess that's where they put the warning out. Like formaldehyde is still a warning. This is a scary unit, isn't it? It kind of makes you wonder what all we got. You know, not to further scare you guys, but, you know, my question right now is, what building products are we using today that we don't know yet are harmful? Anytime they introduce something new, sometimes it takes a while to discover that. By the way, you guys are seeing a lot of green stars in Unit 20, right? Okay. Very, very basic, level 1 stuff. Okay. Another environmental concern is our groundwater contamination. Whenever our groundwater gets contaminated with anything, maybe it's a septic tank, maybe it's a holding pond, maybe it's some kind of surface spill, Whenever that groundwater gets contaminated, it could flow into our water reserve that affects our drinking water. So groundwater contaminations. Another thing that can affect our groundwater or underground storage tanks that we're talking about next. So hang tight. But any kind of contamination when our water could affect our drinking water. If you guys don't have a backup supply of water in your home when you're going carbon monoxide shopping this weekend, pick you up some backup waters too, just in case. Remember High Point about 4 or 5 years ago, we got, was it E. coli or I think it was an E. coli scare. I now have water. Y'all making your shopping lists? By the way, if you haven't got a calculator yet, add that to your shopping list as well. Perfect. Peter's ready. That looks good, Peter. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Flint, Michigan. You guys remember hearing that story? They had all sorts of things going on with their drinking water. Chlorine tasting water. Yeah. Ugh. Get you a water filter. Add to your shopping list. As mentioned, another environmental concern is underground storage tanks. Again, you guys, these are one of these things that we learned about over time. So first off, an underground storage tank is usually steel, and it contains gases, oils, maybe to fuel the home, for example. The problem with these is over time that steel corrodes. And when the steel corrodes, it causes the contents to leak away into and contaminate our groundwater. We were really ignorant once upon a time ago. And once upon a time ago, we thought that the best solution for abandoned storage tanks, not necessarily underground, but just abandoned storage tanks, was just to bury them. Out of sight, out of mind, right? No problem. Now we know better. Now we know that by doing that, now we got, I think I've heard once that it's estimated that there are like millions, that's with an M, millions of abandoned tanks underground. And again, the problem is when they corrode and the contents spill out, get in the groundwater and can contaminate not just your property, but other properties as well. If they do find a leak as a result, oil or gas, for example, they'll source it back. They find out that it's on your property. You're responsible for the cleanup. It's on your property. Not just the cleanup on your property, but the cleanup for everywhere that it affected. Now, there are systems, there are programs in place to aid. There's assistance, financial assistance. I'm not just going to leave you high and dry, but there are regulations. If the underground storage tank is still in use, there's probably going to be a pipe sticking out of the ground. So when you're with your buyers or sellers and you're walking in the backyard and you trip over a pipe, your little red flag should go up, cause you to ask some questions. It takes more than a funnel and kitty litter to take care of it. I've heard buyers say that. Can't just funnel and kitty litter. No, it takes more than that. There's professionals. I bet it did. Regulating these things, cleaning up, maintenance is highly regulated. There's federal and state laws. I mentioned the program earlier. That program is the North Carolina Leaky Petroleum Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Act. It can offer aid, assistance. I want you guys to make a note. Please don't do it now, but make a note on page 505 in your book. There's a fascinating story about what could be the effects of underground storage tanks. Again, please don't read it now. Again, looking for little red flags. So the broker's responsibility when it comes to it, if we know of anything, we have to disclose it. Once we learn about it, we have to disclose it. So if you learn of an underground storage tank, maybe it's in use, maybe it's not. But if you learn of an underground storage tank or any storage tank for oil or gas, we need to disclose that. And if we're working with buyers, we need to encourage them to look at the act and call the professionals to aid in cleanup, removal, whatever they determine is the thing to do to prevent these contaminants from leaking into our groundwater. This is scary stuff, isn't it? We're close. This unit isn't too long. Another environmental concern possibly is any property around landfills. Landfills, again, I mean, highly regulated, federally regulated, state regulated, locally regulated, highly regulated. Landfills are either the leftover of a surface mining operation, surface mining project, or they were dug specifically for the purpose of using as a landfill. And generally with landfill, they have drainage control. So garbage juice doesn't go anywhere. It can be controlled where that goes. We don't want the landfills to affect our groundwater. Buyers may or may not care about this. Has anybody ever driven by a landfill on a hot August day with your windows down? Yeah, it doesn't smell good. So again, personal preference, whether or not this is a concern to the buyer or not. If we're not sure if a landfill is around or nearby, or we don't know the proximity of the landfill, Google Maps. We Google everything else, right? Google Maps. Encourage your buyers to look at Google Maps. See what's around them before they buy. South Carolina? What? I didn't realize that. She says Charleston, South Carolina is built on a massive landfill. Interesting. Interesting. They did a good job on containing the smell, that's for sure. So landfills, again, regulations. Another super scary environmental issue is mold. Mold is everywhere. Y'all, let's take a big deep breath together. Everybody ready? 1, 2, 3. I guarantee you just breathed in some kind of mold spore. Sorry. Mold is everywhere. And mold ranges. Mold can be, you know what happens to a loaf of bread when you've had it for too long? That's mold. Mold also ranges from that the whole way up to black toxic mold, which is like really, really bad. So there's various levels of mold. Mold doesn't need much. It needs moisture and a little bit of oxygen, and it can grow rapidly. Mold does not take long to grow. Ventilation can sometimes help control mold. Help keep that air moving so it doesn't sit. Again, it affects respiratory. Our red flag when it comes to mold is looking for previous leaks or floods. I mean, if you walk into a home and you see a water stain on the ceiling, I'm not an expert. I don't know if there's roof issues or if the bathroom on the second floor is leaked. I don't know. But what I do know is that water stain got there because of some water, right? So my little red flag goes up. And that's the kind of thing that may make me question if we don't have mold issues. So we're looking around for these red flags. When it comes to mold, because it's just everywhere, I mean, it's just how it is. The mere presence of mold is not a material fact unless it's in an excessive amount. The Real Estate Commission defines an excessive amount as more than 1 square foot of mold. The best way to help us detect mold: smell, sniff. Have you guys ever walked into a basement, an old dusty, damp, cement, concrete basement, and said, this smells basement-y? There is no flavor called basement-y. There's no scent called basement-y. What you're smelling is some kind of mold or mildew. And our red flags go up when it comes to the mold. If we can smell it, if we can see it. Again, you guys, remediation is more than taking a bottle of bleach to it. There's more involved than that. We need the experts in to make sure that it's properly remediated. And always remember, we and the owners cannot disclose what they don't know. So there very well may be mold in this house, but if you can't see it, you can't smell it, what can you disclose? Nothing. Always have these red flags go up when we're walking around the house. Talk. We're getting there when we get into Unit 7 next week. We mentioned the first day we talked about that we have to do continuing education each year to maintain our license. And we're going to talk more about your continuing education and how much you have to do and what all that good stuff. But we have part of our continuing education each year is with an elective, and the elective is like a topic of our choosing. And I'm comfortable enough to say, I'm going to venture out there and tell you guys, name a topic related to real estate, and there's a really good chance that there's a CE elective class about it. For example, there is an elective class on mold. You could spend 4 hours learning about mold and knocking out your CE credit. There's that much to say about mold that they wrote a whole dang class about it. There's a lot more to learn about mold. And I'm not gonna lie, it was a pretty interesting class. I didn't know how much I didn't know about mold. That considered the excessive amount of mold, the Real Estate Commission says anything 1 square foot of mold is considered excessive. So 1 square foot or more. Again, our responsibility with this is going to be able to disclose what we know. The truth about mold is what that class is called. 4 hours. I can't make this stuff up. So on page 509, we talk about there's some federal regulations, there's some North Carolina regulations. CERCLA, I don't know where they come up with these names, but CERCLA is the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act on page 509, if you don't want to write all that down. And that's what offers federal funding to help with cleanup, help remediate various environmental issues, environmental concerns. The current owner of the property is going to be responsible for these environmental issues, even if it was caused by the previous owner. Remember what we just said. When you buy a house, when that deed changes hands, the house and all its problems are now yours. Could you go after the previous owner in a court of law? Well, you sue anybody for anything. I'm sure you can find an attorney that'll aid you in that. I don't know how far you're going to get because of the way that home ownership and buying and that is set up. But if something's discovered that you weren't aware of, and the previous owner may not have known either, they're not all shady sellers. Maybe they didn't know about the underground storage tank. That's where we have acts and various things to aid and clean up, making sure that it's handled properly. This is important. This is what we need to know. Summing up this unit. When it comes to environmental concerns, the owner is the one that carries the most liability. So cleanup and management and remediation, the owner is the one that carries the most liability. But please don't think that we're off the hook. When it comes to us, when it comes to the broker, we have got to disclose what we know. Once we learn of an environmental issue, we have to disclose it. Encourage the consumer, encourage the buyer to learn more about it, to investigate it, to inspect it, to learn more about it. As with the owner, we can only disclose what we know. Remember this room that I added on and I put the wall up? Not only do I have faulty electrical back here, but I also have mold back here too. As long as it's not seeping out through the walls or I can't smell it, do I know it's here? The only way I know it's here is if I show it with my crowbar. And guys, we are never expected to damage somebody's property to find these hidden things. We can only disclose what we know. By the way, I'm sorry, I meant to mention pages 510 and 511 are just the various acts offered by CERCLA. So you can see there's our Leaky Petroleum Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Act, Coastal Area Management, Mountain Ridge Protection, Dredge and Fill Act, and Sediment Pollution Control Act. Again, just as an FYI, I don't think you'll be tested on it, but help offer you guys the resource for when your buyers and sellers come across it. I know a couple of you have been sharing with me in the chat that I think one of you said the underground storage tank is what stopped you from buying. There's all sorts of issues. One thing I've learned over the years, particularly in working with buyers, all buyers have a different risk tolerance. And big thing of what we can do is help our buyers identify those risk tolerance. What I mean by that, there's some of you I could say this weekend, let's hop on a plane and go to Vegas. Anybody with me? Let's go. Let's do it. There's others of you that I could say go to Sheetz and buy a scratch off ticket. And you'd be like, oh God, no, I'm not wasting my dollar. Risk tolerance. You all have a different risk tolerance. And that's part of what we can do is help our buyers identify what's important to you. Let's just get this out there. There are risks involved in buying a house. It's a house. It's a house. There are risks involved. And everybody has a different tolerance for those risks. And that's where we're starting to head in this class. Questions on Unit 20?
I have a question.
Hi, Nick.
Hello. I know it's your responsibility to disclose this information to the buyer. Now, if you do find something, do you have to report it to the agencies so that way, you know, the next broker doesn't have to look for it as well? Do they have to, each person would have to, if they, you know, find it, disclose it, or do you report it?
That's a great question, Annette. And the answer to that is, it's going to be up to the person that conducted the investigation and the inspection. So maybe, for example, the buyer had the test done. If they share that finding with us, I now have a material fact that I have to disclose. There's no law that makes them tell me that they found that, right? But if they find it and they tell me, now I have to disclose. Once I learn about it, I have a duty to disclose. Now, if the buyer learns about it and they don't tell me, then I can't disclose what I don't know. So,
no, I guess the question was that if I know about it, I disclose it to not just the buyer or the next party, or do I disclose it to like different agencies as far as them reporting the health hazard to the, you know, to the city government?
Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, no, we don't have to report that to the various agencies, just to the consumer.
Just to the consumer.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, just so they can, you know, we're fact finders, right? So I'm helping them find the facts for them to make that informed decision. But no, we don't have to report it to the authorities.
Okay, so if I was the seller and you found, let's say, the mold or whatever, I can go with a different broker since I know that you have to disclose it to the next buyer.
Sound
I
like
can
a
go with
shady
someone else
seller,
that
Annette.
can find it. Huh?
I said, you sound like a shady seller.
I'm just wondering if the seller can do that, if they, if
Absolutely.
you know that their broker found this problem, I'm gonna go with another brokerage that may not find it, and I don't have to,
And remember, because you are in an agency relationship with me, so I probably may not let you terminate, right? That may depend, but if you fire me and then go with another agency, then yeah, they don't have to disclose it because they don't know about it, right? Until they learn about it. So, but probably the sake of just finding a new agent because they learn of something, now you're dealing into contract violations, you're breaching a contract of your agency agreement, and there's bigger issues there than, just firing an agent. And that's where we're heading in units 7 and 8.
okay.
It's not as easy to fire an agent as one may think. Guess what? It's not as easy to fire a seller or a buyer as one may think either. Our agency agreements are contractually binding relationships. So just because you want me to keep my mouth shut is probably not going to be a reason for you to get out. Does that make sense?
Mm.
Other questions from Unit 20? Key terms, back on page 497. Again, very basic, you guys. I'm serious, a question or two. We're not going to spend all of our study time in Unit 20. Can anybody promise me that? You guys like to gravitate towards the less tested units, probably because they're easier, but look it over before your tests. Refresh on this information, a question or two. Be familiar with those key terms. Key point review is on page 512. Good review, especially in a couple months from now when we're getting ready to take our test and then that student quiz. By the way, y'all know the next time we see each other, it's going to be April, right? March is over like what? Tomorrow? Is that it? I don't know where it goes. First quarter 2023, gone. What the heck happened? I feel like I just said Happy New Year. I don't know. It just goes. Let me know how that works for you, right? All right, let's take our break. When we come back, we're going to Kahoot. So please be back on break on time because we're going to Kahoot. And then we're going to get started in Unit 7 and we're going to talk about what that means. So 10 minutes, please. How we doing? We good for the last hour? Good. Bless you. That's the time of year I keep a tissue handy. That's the most severe I get, which I'm very grateful for. I have a little tissue. All right. Are we back? Can I see you? Did y'all get your phones? So let me take attendance. And then we are going to Kahoot. This Kahoot will be on units 4 through 6. Not much to really Kahoot on unit 20. So this will be 4 through 6. And I have taken attendance. Thank you. And remember, when I take attendance, the camera stays on you. The camera is not just on you for attendance purposes. So you're either scanning the QR code, scan the QR code. It's the easiest way, the quickest way to get in. You're going to the website or the app. You need a game pin. There's your game pin, 770-9564. You're asked to put in your name. I'm fine if you want to use a nickname for Kahoot. Just keep it clean. Yes, that's a voice of experience speaking. You said this Kahoot is on units 4, 5, and 6. Remember, I'm not going to make you Kahoot. If you don't want to play on your phone with us, you don't have to. At a minimum, I think you should play in your head. If you're not getting Kahoot questions right through the unit. If you're not getting the end of unit questions right, go back through. If you're not getting the online learning system questions right, go back through. Everybody in that wants to play. And if your phone goes to sleep, it'll look like it's kicking out. So just make sure wake your phone up, keep it awake. We good? Ready to Kahoot? Woo. All right, let's Kahoot. Units 4, 5, and 6. Question number 1. The system of legal description that defines a parcel of land by its parameter is. Seconds. Legal description that defines by the parameter is the, good job guys, meets and bounds. Meets and bounds is a tour of the property. You start at the point of beginning and you walk the parameter. You go from monument to monument, or let me rephrase that. The surveyor goes from monument to monument until they get back to the point of beginning. So it's a parameter. It doesn't necessarily identify the improvements, but we know if it's an improvement within the parameter, it's going to be a pertinent. Questions on this one? So let's see who got it right the fastest. Joe came in first, followed by CGB, Sid, Nugent, and Turtle. Question number 2. In a North Carolina real estate transaction, excise taxes are the responsibility of the seconds. Seller pays excise tax. Seller pays excise tax. It's part of their closing costs. They're going to tax you one more time when you go to sell it. That one more time is called excise tax. I got to tell you, I love you guys. Nobody ever or very rarely says the real estate agent. Y'all like, I don't know what the heck this is, but I know darn well I'm not paying for it. I'll let the attorney pay for it before I pay for it. Seller pays the excise tax. Questions on this one? Shifted a bit. Sid's on top now. Nugent, CGB, Turtle, and Joe. Still same people, just shuffled around. Let's see what we got here. Question number 3. Which of the following deeds contains no express or implied warranty? Ten seconds. Following deeds has no express or implied warranties. That's our quitclaim deed. Quitclaim deed, no warranties in a quitclaim deed. Quitclaim deed says what I got, you get. So if I got nothing, what you getting? Absolutely nothing. In North Carolina, we may use a quitclaim deed to fix a mistake, fix an error. If you get married or divorced and you want to add or remove your spouse, we can use a quitclaim deed. Create an easement, quitclaim deed. General warranty deeds have the most warranties. General warranty deeds have the most covenants. Questions on this one? Now on the board, shuffling up a bit. Sid, Nugent stayed up. Joe's back up top. Josh and Liv are on. MB has a streak of 3. You're on fire. Question number 4. Which of the following is an essential element of a valid North Carolina deed? Let's look at page 87. Let's make sure we're good on this. So on pages 87 and 88, we talked about things that are required elements, essential elements, required ingredients. We also talked about things that are not, but are often found. Words of conveyance is an essential element, although we typically don't see, the words of conveyance. The grantor has to state that they intend to convey the property to the grantee. This is the problem topic, and this is why I cahoot. Yes, we record deeds, absolutely. We put them down at the public record. But guess what? We don't do it because it makes for a valid deed. Remember, the judge is the one determining the validity of a deed. And quite frankly, the judge doesn't care if it's recorded or not. The reason we record is because the Connor Act steps in and says there are certain documents that are required to be recorded. And then the Connor Act gives us the list of things that they require. You can have a valid deed without having it recorded according to the judge. Another thing that's required, and this is where they like to trick you on your test. I hate to say that they like to trick you, but let's face it. The grantor signs the deed. Tricky, isn't it? We need to know this stuff pretty well, don't we? The grantor is the giver of the deed. The grantee does not have to sign. And again, the seal is just one of those things that if it's there, great. If not, the judge is not using that to determine the validity. Questions on this one? So shuffled a bit. Sid, Nugent, and Joe are still on. Liv came up a bit. Ashley's on the board. That said, it was a tough round. 6 of you lost your answer streak. That's all right. Let's get it back now. Here we go. Question number 5. Restrictive covenants. Seven seconds. Restrictive covenants apply to and bind all successive owners of the property. That's another way of saying that they are what? They are appurtenant, which means they run with the land, not the individual owner. When the first lot is sold, the covenants stay. When the 200th sale happens, the covenants stay. They bind to an excessive, they stay long after the developer is gone. Questions on this one? Nugent's on top now. Sid, Joe, Liv, and Ashley are staying put. 4 of you got your answer streak back. Question number 6, the primary intent of zoning. There's 2. Seconds. The primary intent of zoning to control how we use the land. Yes, they can limit the types of businesses. We can have regulations. Yes, we can protect residential neighborhoods. We talked about buffer zones. Yes, all that could be part of it, but we're asking for the big picture. So the big picture of zoning. And again, this is what your test likes to do for you. We're looking for the best answer. There's some other good answers in here, right? But we're looking for the best. By the way, what's wrong with the blue one? Zoning is local in nature. There are no statewide ordinances. So the city of Raleigh, our state capital, is not going to set zoning ordinances. It's local. Questions on this one? Well, that didn't change at all. Except Nana is our highest climber. You should see the little summit on your phone. I think you see a little symbol. And the last one for this Kahoot, which of the following best describes a variance? 1 second. Which one best describes a variance? An exception. An implies how many? How many property owners can request a variance? Just one. One, an exception. One homeowner is going to the zoning board. They're requesting permission to break the rules. They have to prove a hardship. For whatever reason, your zoning won't let me use the property the way I intend. Give me permission to break the rules. The pre-existing use that varies from the current code is our non-conforming use. You're using the property that doesn't conform to the zoning, current zoning. Questions on this one? So here's our podium, our leaderboard. Our third place is Joe. Our second place is Sid. And our first place, this Kahoot, is Nugent. We got fourth and fifth runners up, Liv and Ashley. Back in the day when we were in person, I used to go by my podium winners, your candy bar o' choice. Obviously, I can't do that now. I've never tried to mail candy bars, but I'm pretty sure I can't. So how about this? How about all of us go out this afternoon and buy ourselves a candy bar? Doesn't that sound like a nice treat? Go get yourself a candy bar of choice for your Kahoot. My candy bar budget has greatly improved since we went on Zoom. I can tell that for you right now. So let's go buy a candy bar this afternoon. Everybody good with that? Yeah. One guy one time told him like sugar-free gum. That's not a treat. Any questions from 4, 5, 6, or 20? All right. Here we go. Units, I may have mentioned the last class. You'll probably hear me say it a few more times. Units 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested units. Guys, the next 2-3 weeks, we're going to be in these 4 units. All next week, we'll probably be in unit 7. Somebody mentioned earlier that it's, I think, the longest unit in the textbook. I would agree with you. I would also add that it's the most in-depth unit in the textbook. Unit 7 and 8 are our agency units. So unit 7 talks about our brokerage relationships, the various laws and practices. Unit 8 gets into our agency agreements. So how we form these agency relationships and what these contractually binding agreements mean. If you have not looked at unit 7 yet, I'm begging you to spend time with it this weekend. Heavily tested. You guys figured out by now I'm kind of a math nerd, just a little bit of a math nerd. I sat down with your end of class exam one time and I counted the questions. 40% of your exam is from units 7, 8, 9, and 10. 40% are from those 4 units. That's what I mean by heavily tested. Is everybody hearing what I'm trying really hard to tell you? We're getting ready to see a lot of red stars. We're getting ready to see a lot of information. These agency units, it's my belief, this is what you guys thought you were getting into when you signed up for this class. It's how I can be an agent, how I can work with buyers and sellers, tenants, landlords, if you're going into the property management relationship. With that being said, I will say the focus on these 4 units is residential sales. That is the primary focus, primarily what we're going to see. But agency can apply to any type of brokerage relationship that we have. We will, I know the number one question on your guys' mind right now is your money, your commission. When do I get paid and how much? Please, we will talk all about your commission in unit 8. I promise you. We'll talk about how you can get paid, when you can get paid, how much you're going to get paid, all about your commission in unit 8. But you know what we have to do before we get paid? we have to form our agency relationships. We have to understand how agency works. So before we can talk about your money, we need to spend time in Unit 7. Don't ask me questions about your commission. We will get to it, I promise. Is everybody good with that? You can't get paid if you don't properly handle agency. So we're building up to it, I promise. So before we actually get to the book, well, actually before that, our guide, our roadmap for Unit 7, we're going to explain agency. We're going to define agency. And we're going to talk about the different types of agency relationships. We're going to differentiate between a customer and a client and what my role is for each. There are certain duties that I owe my customers. There are certain duties that I owe my client. So we're going to talk about my roles. We're going to talk about how you become my customer, how you become my client. We're spending time with those material facts. This is where we're going to do the deep dive in material facts. And then we're going to talk about my duty to disclose my agency status, my agency relationship to the consumer, to anyone in the transaction, and what that looks like as well. Again, we're just getting started on this today. We'll spend most of next week is going to be in this unit. What does this say to you guys? If we're spending over 2 classes on 1 unit, what does that mean to you? I hope you're thinking it's kind of important. Yes? Yes. Okay. Before we get into the book, before we get into Unit 7, everybody just put your pencils down for 1 second. And I want you guys just to listen. There's some ideas that I want you to start wrapping your brain around, because I think the sooner you can wrap your brain around, the better you can understand agency. So just listen, think some things through. We're going to introduce you to something called caveat emptor. It's your Latin lesson for the day. You'll see it again in your book, so you don't have to write it down. Caveat emptor is Latin for let the buyer beware. North Carolina is a caveat emptor state, which means it is the buyer's responsibility to learn about the property before they own it. The seller doesn't have to disclose much. I've already told you the one thing that the seller has to disclose, and that's if they know of lead-based paint. The seller is protected, is covered under caveat emptor. The onus to learn about the property is on the buyer. And when the buyer hires an agent, we take on that responsibility with them. So caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. When the consumer hires us, they don't hire us. They hire the firm that we're affiliated with. Now, every single agent I know, myself included, run around talking about my buyer, my seller. But guess what? It's not my buyer. It's not my seller. It's the firm's buyer. It's the firm's seller. The agency relationship is with the firm. The firm allows me to work with their buyer and their seller. In North Carolina, homes are sold as is. Remember what we said earlier, sellers don't have to do repairs. We can ask, but the seller has every right to say no. Why? Because in North Carolina, homes are sold as is. Sometimes we see these advertised as is, sometimes we don't. There's a very important sentence in our standard offer to purchase and contract that says, the property is being sold in its current condition. That's just a really nice way of saying as is. The buyer can ask the seller to do repairs. There's no rule that says that they can't ask, but the seller's under no obligation to ever do any repairs. If they agree to fix anything, if they agree to change a light bulb, we say, thank you very much, understanding that there's no obligation, there's no criteria for them to do so. I think working with buyers, this as is thing is one of the harder things for them to understand. I do think this varies from state to state as well. So if you have a buyer coming from another state, the seller may be required to do certain repairs. They may get to North Carolina and say, that's not fair. You're telling me I'm buying a $300,000 house and the seller doesn't have to fix a thing? And in North Carolina, the answer is that's exactly right, because it's as is. Typically, the seller pays commission to the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with whomever brings the buyer. We're going to talk about how much the seller is going to pay, how we're going to share that commission. This is why we have listing agreements. This is why we have agency agreements. So we're getting into that discussion. The reason I say typically, the exception to this rule is if the seller is a for sale by owner. A for sale by owner did not hire a firm. A for sale by owner is going out and doing it on their own. So they're not obligated to pay commission. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But if the seller hires a firm, the seller pays their commission to the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with whomever is bringing the buyer. I think we've said this a few times already. My role as an agent, I'm a fact finder. I help my buyers and sellers gather the information so they can make an informed decision. We're out there with them investigating and learning and making sure they understand what their decisions are, the consequences of their decisions, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing I want to introduce you guys to now, we're going to get more into this in Unit 8, but I do want to introduce it to you now because you're going to see it in Unit 7, is some terminology, some verbiage, and it depends on what side you're on as to what you might be called. So up until this point, we've been referring to the buyer's agent, the buyer's firm, the seller's agent, the seller's firm. The official terms that we're going to see in our agency agreements and our contracts, when we get into Unit 8, the one working with the buyer can be referred to as the buyer's agent, but they can also be referred to as the selling agent. They are selling the property to the buyer. The one working with the seller could be referred to as the seller's agent or the seller's firm, but they could also be referred to as the listing agent and the listing firm. Again, we're going to see this slide a couple more times by the time we're done. And I need you guys to see and hear the difference between the ings and the ers. When we're talking about the selling agent or firm, we're referring to the one working with and assisting the buyer. They're selling the property to the buyer. In our Campbell folder, the other thing that's going to happen in Unit 7 is we start introducing you to specific license law and commission rule. License law is like North Carolina general statute. It's enacted, created, and approved by the government. Commission rule are rules that the North Carolina Real Estate Commission have created and developed and had approved by the government. And we're going to start introducing you to some of these license law and commission rules. I don't necessarily need you guys to read all of license law and commission rule. There are some that I will point out to you for reference. There are some that we have a conversation about. But out the gate, there is a commission rule, and it's in the Campbell folder of the online learning system. And Commission Rule A.0104 specifically addresses agency agreements and disclosure. Commission Rule A.0104 is Unit 7 and Unit 8. I need you guys to go into the Campbell folder, find this commission rule, and read it. And when you're done, I need you to go back and read it again. And when you've done it a second time, why the heck not? Go back and read it again. Commission Rule A.0104 is what regulates our agency agreements and disclosure. So it's in the Campbell folder. If I try to remember before we leave, I'll point it out. If I don't, it's in the Campbell folder. Again, there's others that I'll use as reference. Maybe you look at it, maybe you don't, but this is one that I think that you should. Has anybody ever sat down and tried to read law and rule before? Have you ever sat down and picked up a law book and tried to read it? Isn't that some interesting stuff? Same thing with license law and commission rule. Guys, you may not get through it all in one setting. It's not a fun read. It's not an easy read. It's rule, for goodness sakes. So if you find, it's only like 2.5 pages, but if you find that you start getting lost, put it aside, break it up into sections, break it up into chunks so you can digest it piece by piece at time. Does that make sense? Has anybody ever heard the expression or the question, I guess, how do you eat an elephant? Has anybody ever heard that before? How do you eat an elephant? And the answer to that is one bite at a time. And when it comes to license law and commission rule and the various other things we're introducing you to, do it one bite at a time. Break it down into sections. So now going back to our book, officially getting into Unit 7. Starting on page 134, we introduce you to the idea of the law of agency. Now, despite its name, the law of agency is not just one law. It is comprised of several different laws, several different sources. The law of agency started with the common law of agency. Common law of agency comes from the days in England when we served a king. And how we, the king was our everything, and we did everything for the king. And from that, transcribed into what we know today is that common law of agency of serving our clients, serving our customers. Law of agency also comes about from contract law, previous lawsuits, previous court cases. Your book on page 135 has a story about the Adena lawsuit. And I think you guys should read it because this helps us understand how we have agency today, where we're at today. Once upon a time ago, buyers didn't get agents. Once upon a time ago, it was only sellers that represented or were represented by agents. Once upon a time ago, we all worked for the seller. To better help you visualize what that looks like, let's pretend you're going to go out this weekend and buy a car. And you go to a car lot, and the salesman, they kind of appear out of nowhere, don't they? Hey, folks, how you doing today? They just kind of poof, there they are. You look around the car lot. You don't find a car that you like. What do? You go to the next lot, right? Right? That's what real estate used to look like. If you wanted to buy a house, you couldn't call somebody and say, help me buy a house. You went to the firm and you said, show me what you have. Show me your inventory. And if you didn't like any of their products, you went on to the next firm. That's what we mean by the buyer wasn't represented. Everything we did once upon a time ago was for the seller. Well, then there was an incident. There was a contract law that appeared, and there was an incident. And that was the Adena story. The incident that happened was in Minnesota. Somebody bought a house, and they were led to believe, they felt that the agent working with them had their best interest. They thought that the agent represented them. And they found out after the transaction that they didn't. So they filed a lawsuit. You guys know how this works sometimes, right? One person files a lawsuit and then 50 other people stand up and say, oh yeah, me too. I felt like I was represented. I felt like, and that's what happened in Adena. And all these former buyers started coming forward saying, I thought they had my best interest as well. And the Adena lawsuit resulted in a settlement. And that settlement was to the tune of $19.9 million. That's with an M, $19.9 million. As a result of the Adena lawsuit, it caused other states to reevaluate their agency and to reevaluate how we represent buyers and sellers in the transaction. And in the mid-90s, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission introduced buyer's agency to North Carolina. Did y'all hear what I just said? The mid-90s. That wasn't that long ago. So buyer's agency is still fairly new to North Carolina, right? Guys, there are veterans out there. I mean, we have seasoned agents and then we have veterans. There are people running around with a real estate license today, practicing today, that remember life before buyer's agency in North Carolina. It wasn't that long ago. Today, we have buyer's agency in North Carolina. Today, we have agency disclosure laws. Again, everything we do in agency is to protect the consumer, to protect the public. Not all states have buyer's agency today. So a lot of what we talk about, units 7 and 8, may be specific to North Carolina because we can't say all states represent buyers. Now, I'm not going to get into what states do and do not. I honestly don't know. Because what do we care about? Well, we care about North Carolina. If you want to learn about other states, then go to their pre-licensing. Go through there. I suggest you finishing mine first to see about getting licensed in another state. So contract law, throughout the years, various court cases, various court rulings. The best example we have is that Adena lawsuit. The law of agency also comes to be by North Carolina Real Estate License Law. Like we said, that's a North Carolina General Statute. NCGS is North Carolina General Statute. Set up, created by the government, our state government. And then the Real Estate Commission also has the powers to create rules, understanding that the Real Estate Commission just can't do whatever they want to. Their rules, any rule additions, changes, deletions have to be approved by the state. It's all legislative. It's all this governing body that regulates how we work in agency. Again, I think the name is very misleading. The law of agency is not one law. It's comprised of all of this together, and it got us to where we are today. What was it going to look like tomorrow? I have no idea. But I know things are constantly evolving and changing, and license law and commission rule needs to evolve and change with it as well. On page 136, we can officially see our caveat emptor, which is let the buyer beware. What we mean by caveat emptor is that the burden of discovery is on the buyer. The burden to investigate the property, to learn about the property before they purchase is on the buyer. The seller doesn't have to disclose. One thing that we're going to learn in Unit 7, the seller can hide behind caveat emptor. But guess what? The real estate agent cannot. So we have the seller that doesn't have to disclose, and we have the agent that must disclose material facts. Can we see a bit of a conflict? Can we see a bit of a, seller says the roof leaks, don't tell anybody. Shh. The seller doesn't have to disclose that the roof leaks, but guess what? Once we learn that it does, we have to disclose it. So more on that when we get into our deep dive and material facts. We'll see that next week. Even with caveat emptor, even with the onus being on the buyer to learn as much about the property as they possibly can, the seller doesn't have to disclose, but caveat emptor does not give the seller a golden ticket to lie. The seller could be held liable if it's found that they lied to the buyer or lied to the agents that was translated to the buyer. Does that make sense? So even though they don't have to disclose, this still does not give them the right to lie. Nobody in a real estate transaction is allowed to lie. That includes us, by the way. I feel the need to throw that in there. Nobody in a real estate transaction can lie. All we're saying with caveat emptor is that the seller doesn't have to disclose. It is the responsibility of the buyer to learn about the property. One of our first big words in Unit 7 is fiduciary. Fiduciary is a relationship of trust. When the public hires us to be their agent, they should trust that we have their best interest in mind. They should trust that we're here to protect and benefit them. And that's what it means to be a fiduciary. Once I am hired as an agent, my duties and responsibilities are to my principal. We're going to define principal in just 1 second. And I need to put my principal's interests above all others. Sometimes that includes my own. This goes back to that common law of agency when we served in England, when we served a king. Did your interests matter when it came to you versus the king? No, it was all about what's best for the king. What does the king want? And that's that kind of fiduciary. I need you guys to wrap your brains around this right now. Agency is not about you. Agency is about your client. That's why I'm not paying you until Unit 8. Guys, I'm here to tell you right now, real estate is a people industry. If you're coming into this industry led by dollar signs, you may not make it far. You take care of the people and the money will follow. I promise you. A big part of our business, a big part of our clientele is building these relationships. If you talk to an agent that's been at it for 30, 40 years, they're not out prospecting new clients. They're relying on referral business from previous clients. They treat this one client good in this fiduciary manner. And that client tells their family and friends, and they tell their family and friends, and they tell their family and friends. You come into this about me, me, and when do I get paid? You're not going to get far. Do we know what a Google review can do to you? Do we know? Does anybody? Do we get it? Do we know what a negative review can do to you? So you have one client that goes on Google and says, my agent only cared about their commission. How's that going to affect your future business? Hear me when I say, it ain't about you. It's about the principal. It's about the client. You take care of the people and the money will follow. And that's why we're here. This is why we have Unit 7 and 8 to teach you guys how to take care of the people, how to follow these rules and regulations and laws so you can build your business and have a long-term real estate career. The fiduciary is a relationship of trust. They trust that you have their best interest. And if you don't, you could suffer consequences. We're going to talk about disciplinary action from the Real Estate Commission. We've already said they could sue you. How far are they going to get in a court of law? I don't know. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a judge. I don't know the situation. I know they can. The judge is going to come down harder on you in the transaction than they are the consumer because you and I know better. Does that make sense? You and I are the experts in this transaction, not your buyer and seller. So turn with me, if you will, to page 137, and we're going to define some words. Agency is that fiduciary relationship between our client and the firm and us. So that's the fiduciary relationship. The principal, also known as the client, I think this is a problem topic. So please make sure we see this. They're used interchangeably. If I refer to the principal, I'm referring to the client. If I say the client, I'm referring to the principal. They are one and the same. The client is the one that hires us. They hire us to aid them in this transaction. How they hire us is through an agency agreement. And we will get into those agency agreements in Unit 8. So they enter into a contractually binding relationship with us. They hire us and they become my principal and my client. Those that don't, I'm skipping around just a bit, but those that don't hire us is the customer. I could take my whole market and divvy it into two groups of people. You're either my client or you're my customer. How do I know who you are? If you're my client, you hired me. If you're my customer, you didn't. We're going to learn next week. I have duties and responsibilities to both. I have duties and responsibilities to my client. I don't have as many to the customer, but I still have duties and responsibilities to my customer as well. The agent is the person or the entity that is authorized to represent the interest of another. If you're an agent, you've been hired. If you're an agent, your firm has been hired to assist this client through the transaction. Subagents get a little tricky. I'm not spending much time with subagents now because I know we're going to spend more time with it next week. Right now, let's understand a few things about subagency, just introducing you to this idea. First off, when you see words with the prefix sub, we're saying under. You guys know, like a submarine, it's under. Same thing here. So if we're referring to a subagent, we're referring to an agent of an agent. They're involved in the transaction, but they don't have a client. They have a customer. They are assisting an unrepresented, typically buyer, in the transaction. Again, we're going to talk more about subagency. You got it in Unit 7 if you want to look ahead. It's one of those things that gets a little tricky, so we will spend time on subagency. I think for right now, let's just understand it's an agent of an agent. You are working under the capacity of another agent to assist this unrepresented buyer through the transaction. The other definition we have is that of a facilitator broker or a transactional broker. This is a non-agency relationship. This relationship is not about the people. It's about the transaction. In North Carolina, transactional brokers are not allowed. What I'm telling you, in North Carolina, if a real estate agent is involved, one of the parties has to be a client, either the buyer or the seller. In a transactional brokerage relationship, both parties are the customer. Again, you guys, this comes up. I had a teammate call me a couple months ago. He said he has a buddy that wants to go for sale by owner. Well, for sale by owner means they chose not to hire me, right? Who did they ask to help them sell their house? Themselves. They didn't hire me. They're selling it on their own. So he has a buddy that's for sale by owner. And that for sale by owner found an unrepresented buyer. The unrepresented buyer didn't want to hire him. The for sale by owner didn't want to hire him. But they called him and said, can you help us facilitate this transaction? Can you be a part? We have paperwork. We have things that they may help them get through the transaction. But neither one of them wanted to hire him. He said, can I do this? And I said, no. He said, but they're going to pay me. I said, well, that doesn't matter. In North Carolina, if we are involved in a real estate transaction, somebody has to be hired. And maybe they're not hired by me. Maybe they're hired by another agent, but somebody has to be the client. Does this make sense? In a transactional relationship, you have two customers. And in North Carolina, it's not allowed. So I've been babbling on about representing and unrepresenting. And this gets us back to some of our terminology. Your client or your principal is represented. They hired you, thus they get representation. The customer is unrepresented. For whatever reason, they chose not to hire you. We're going to look at some examples. I may not get to them today, but we're going to look at some examples. We're just introducing you to all this stuff, getting us ready for next week. So understanding the terminology, the one that hires you is represented. Everybody else in that transaction, if they don't hire you, they are unrepresented. Talking more about what that means. We work for our clients. We work with the customer. The difference is I'm going to take my clients by the hand. I'm going to guide them through this transaction. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to help get them through it. Do they get tired? I'm going to pick them up and carry them the rest of the way through. I'm going to work for them. I'm going to do what they tell me to do. They hired me. They're my boss. The customer, I'm still walking side by side with. I'm not leaving out the dirt. But if they say, Julie, I'm tired, pick me up and carry me, I'm going to say, guess you should have hired me. There's this different level of service. Those different levels are where we're getting into next week. I have an image here of an airplane to help us better understand this client versus customer relationship. My mentor uses the airplane. She knows I uses it, so I'm not stealing it, right? So she knows I use it with you guys to help you understand. Let's say you are the pilot of this plane. You're the one flying this plane, the agency plane, if you will. Our clients get first class treatment. Our customers are back there in coach. Now, let me ask you guys something. If you're flying this plane, isn't it your job? Isn't it your responsibility to get everybody in the plane from point A to point B? Isn't that your job as the pilot? Yeah, same thing in the agency relationship. As the agent, my job is to get the parties from the beginning to the end, to get them through the transaction, to give them the information they need to complete it. The difference is the level of service that each party receives in between. I've heard first class is really nice. I hear in first class you get what, a warm meal and a hot towel and maybe some champagne. Back in coach, what do I get? Lukewarm Coca-Cola and unsalted pretzels, right? Are we still all on the same plane? Are we still all getting from point A to point B at the same time? Yeah, the difference is the level of service that we receive in between. So as you guys learning about agency, wrapping your brains around agency, your clients get first class treatment. Your customers are back there in coach. Again, when we come back together next week, we're going to talk about the duties that we owe our clients, the duties that we owe our customers. Do I have any questions so far? Just grazing the surface. I probably have a lot of questions, but anything we've covered so far. I think this is a big part of it, is understanding that client, that customer, that unrepresented person versus that represented person. Bear with me one second. I'm going to start here on Tuesday. Don't go anywhere just yet, please. I do want to go to our online learning system. Yeah, so down here in the Campbell folder, just to make sure I see it, because it's that important. In our Campbell folder, here's your PowerPoints for Unit 7 through 10 if you want to look ahead, plus you have Unit 7 in your book. But in our Campbell folder is that Commission Rule A.0104. You can read it from your screen. You guys know in the online learning system, you see this little box right here with the arrow coming out of it. Everybody see that? That gives you the ability to download. So if you want to download this document and save it to your computer, if you want to download it and print it, it's only like 2.5 pages. I don't care how you do it, but I think you guys should read this. And when you're done, I think you should read it again. And what the heck, just for fun, read it a third time. Everybody with me? You can't read this enough. And this is the basis of where we're heading in unit 7 and 8. What questions, comments, concerns do I have? You guys going to spend some time with agency this weekend? Please, please. We'll get through it. We'll talk about it. We'll go through it all next week, I promise. We just kind of introduced you to it right now. And I think this is a great place to start. Hopefully, I hope I put a little bit of fear into you. I usually don't like to put fear in people, but we as future agents need to understand agency. Yes? Yes. And it starts in unit 7. Why? No, we will talk about that. That's a great question, but we will talk about that, what that means. All right, guys, that's what I got. So I hope y'all have a great weekend. Enjoy go get your candy bar. Enjoy the nice weather. Spring is here. Never hesitate to reach out to me if I can help you guys answer questions. Remember, that's why I'm here. So if you guys are saying, gee, I don't want to bother Julie, stop it. Bother me. I want you to bother me. Nothing hurts me more than when you guys show up on test day and say, I never really understood that. Straight to the heart. Fair enough? Is that good for everybody? All right. Y'all have a great weekend, and I will see you at 9 a.m. sharp on Tuesday.